Sorry, boy, but his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what crossing.
Captain's got to teach stuff.
Morning from the Batcave. It is Sunday. It is August 20, 2023, and actually went for a hike this morning. It was a cool 80 degrees at 5 a.m. and managed to get a hike in, and I'm a fat piece of crap. I need to get more exercise in, and hopefully it will drop below 115 soon here so I can get out and hike a little bit more regularly, but that's what it is. So been a little bit too heavy on the sitting and reading and researching. So anyways, I went to church today, and on the way back I was listening to Chris over at Protestant View. Chris, for you guys who are watching this video, he has some interesting videos. He's following my channel as well. He comes from a Seventh-day Adventist camp, and he is going to mostly focus on corrections on assertions and things like that related to how the Seventh-day Adventists interpret Daniel. And what I wanted to do, I heard him have a guest speaker on, and I think his name was Clement, and I was listening to their video, and they were kind of, Scott was kind of asserting that this is an old classic argument against dispensationalism, which I don't have a problem with saying that dispensationalism originated with the Roman. It didn't originate with the Roman Catholics. It originated with Darby, and it was kind of a pseudo-charismatic, but it's also it's kind of a derivative of covenant theology, because the Calvinists were talking in terms of dispensations before dispensationalism came about, but the Calvinists hold to an allegorical two-covenant theology from that they actually believe the new covenant started with Adam, and it's really stupid. If you try to work it out, it doesn't make any sense, but that's how they prove out their predestination election stuff and act like infant baptism is the same as baptism, or is the same as circumcision, and that basically there was always justification by faith and people getting born again in the Old Testament. They're trying to prove a number of things that don't belong to the Bible, and then dispensationalism is going to come along and say, no. People were saved this way in the Old Testament, they're saved this way in the New Testament, and then they're going to be saved this way in the tribulation and this way in the millennium, okay? Dispensationalism is equally wrong. I'm not supporting dispensationalism, but when you guys take arguments against dispensationalism and apply them to all futurism, you're actually doing something that is extraordinarily ignorant, because all this material is online, and anybody for free, all you need to do is type in ANF 01, and it goes 01 to 09, and you literally have these were books that were translated mostly by Reformed theologians. You're going to find in the introductions and stuff a lot of Reformed slant, a lot of amillennial slant, a lot of pro-Catholic, because the Reformers are trying to just be the true Catholic Church. They're not really trying to they're not a restorationist movement. They're not a sola scriptura movement. All sola scriptura, you started hearing that in the 19th century. These guys were never sola scriptura. They're never trying to get back to original apostolic Christianity. They were trying to reform the Roman Catholic institution. So you're going to see a lot of stuff said positively, and the only stuff they're really going to be critical of is the stuff that pushes the Pope forward, okay? But these guys this is stuff that you're going to have pretty much, these guys translated everything they could find from the ante-Nicene period. And I mean everything. I mean Gnostic stuff. I mean little scraps of letters. They would I'll just give you an example here. This is the Apostolic Fathers with Justin Martyr and Irenaeus and Apostolic Fathers. The book's in my car, but I have a hard copy of the Apostolic Fathers. That's going to be like the Didache, Barnabas, First Clement, let's see, Shepherd of Hermas, Diogenes Timotheus is usually going to be counted with that. Basically guys who they thought originally knew the apostles directly. So Second Clement slapped in with that, even though it wasn't made till the 3rd century, but the Catholics thought that. Shepherd of Hermas was around, earliest dating they have is 150, but it's actually the brother of Pope, or the Bishop Pius the First, and I think that's going to be around 150 AD, so that shouldn't have been there. But Barnabas, the entire church held that Barnabas was Barnabas up until the Reformation, and the reason is because Barnabas is the first one to make it very clear that there's a seventh day, literal 1,000-year millennium, and that history is broken up into 7 days. And that's going to be very important to understand how you interpret everything afterwards, because there is literally nobody in the early church that was amillennial until Origen comes along, and Origen is a Neoplatonist. Anyone who says Origen's not a Neoplatonist is a frickin' liar. He literally went to the school of the guy who started Neoplatonism, comes out of that school, writes his first principles, and it's completely Neoplatonic. He's literally saying we're the fallen angels. We eat the Eucharist and go through the baptism rites and all this stuff to get our wings back, and we're basically going back to our pre-incarnate state. They believes that souls are immortal. He believes in reincarnation. He believes there's no literal bodily resurrection, and so he thinks the millennium is the idea of a literal millennium where people are being resurrected and then other people are procreating and then other people are eating and drinking and stuff like that. He thinks that's absurd. And so he's basically arguing, he's going to put forward, we don't have it in his writings, the first arguments put forward, but we have them in multiple people that were taught by him, and that's how we know they came from him. You have to understand, these guys are they're going to write treatises sometimes, and a lot of times they're going to write in response to a heresy, so you get what they believe out of that. But when I see three guys who were all taught by Origen, and we know this because they're all saying they were taught by Origen, and all three of them separately in three different parts of the Mediterranean Sea are all saying all of a sudden in the next generation that there's that the millennium is something that started with Christ's first advent and it's figurative and it's going to end with Christ's second advent, then I know they got it from Origen. It's just common sense, okay? So because Origen obviously is anti a literal body resurrection, and he is, you have Methodius is a guy who speaks out against that in the immediate generation, like within 10 or 20 years of Origen's death, and his writings are eventually going to lead Epiphanes of Salamis in the early to middle 4th century to start researching Origen, because he died in the middle of the 3rd century, and start researching his stuff and realize this dude's a full-blown heretic, and that's what leads to them eventually declaring Origen. He gets declared a heretic twice. So for a while you don't know that Origen's a heretic because most people aren't reading a 400-page Greek treatise from a guy, and most people who are educated by Origen, they're buying into his crap, and they're also getting, like, he educated the leading bishops in the East. So I mean, you're talking about people from not Carthage, but Tunisia, all the way on over to Alexandria, Caesarea, Jerusalem, some in Antioch, but not quite as much because they had their own traditions, so they were able to stave him off, and then they actually started their own schools in the next generation. But all the way up into central Turkey, like major top figures in Christianity. I mean, Dionysius, Gregory of Thaumaturga. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. There's like 5 guys who are like the top guys in the next generation after him in the East. They're all educated by Origen, and not one of them are refuting him. And then his stuff gets translated into Latin in the next century, and the guy who's translating it is actually redacting stuff because he knows how bad it sounds in Latin, this guy Rufinus. And Jerome calls him out, and he makes a copy of what it is in the original Greek, and it's just obvious heresy. Like he teaches against the bodily resurrection. That's what's obvious, okay? So he's going to say that Jesus had a body in his resurrection, but it's like a spiritual ethereal body. It's not, it's not physical human flesh. It's something different. But he is going to argue that our goal is to get back to being incorporeal, which is the Platonic word for not material, basically. So he's going to say he doesn't have a material body, and he is going to carefully avoid using the terms, when you're quoting the scripture where Jesus says, look at my hands, look at my feet, and check them out. I think he might use them in Against Celsus. Against Celsus is more public, but his first principles is more private, I think. I think his students had that. I don't think just he broadly published that book. I think his students did. But the people who knew him knew who he taught, and they were calling him out in his own day as this guy is saying Satan can get saved. And this is all in my book. He absolutely is saying God is going to... These guys are absolute universalists, okay? And it just boils down to how they view the Godhead. They see God as impassibly merciful, and so if God is impassibly merciful, then there's no way he could forever condemn someone to hell, because it goes against his nature, and God's nature isn't affected by us. So no matter how bad we are, they would see it as like a compatible determinism. Eventually, we are going to relent and start to obey God, because we're going to see what's good for us, because God doesn't change. Okay, that's how he saw it, and so he thought even from hell the devil can repent. So that's where you're going to start to see amillennialism come in, and then you're going to start to see what are now in the current day the Daniel's 70th week arguments that your preterists are going to use and your historicists are going to use to say that Daniel's 70th weeks were totally fulfilled. You're going to start to see those in Clement. So this is the end of the 2nd century, about 100 years after John, but I'm going to show you from before that you have premillennialism, you have a literal 1,000 years, you have a literal 7,000 years, and then from Hippolytus in the middle, he is actually in the, this is probably written between 10 and 20 years into the 3rd century, okay? So you're talking 215, okay? So like 120 years removed from John. He's taught by Irenaeus, who is taught by Polycarp, who is taught by John, and he is going to say how Daniel's 70th week is actually in the future. Okay, he's going to be the first one to do that, at least in writing. Okay, but he is doing that before Origen's ideas come in, and around the same time that Clement is probably has written his Stromata, where he first calculates Daniel's 70 weeks as ending with. He actually accounts it as ending with. I think he accounts it as ending with. The destruction of the temple in 70 AD, and then Tertullian counts it as he actually has like a mythological belief that Nero did the abomination of desolation. He came to Jerusalem and did the abomination of desolation. That never happened in history. Nero killed himself. But there was a rumor that you can find in Suetonius's Lives of the 12 Caesars, where that's circulating around in his day, that Nero's going to come back from the dead, and he mentions Christus, so that rumor's obviously coming from the Christians. There was basically a myth started that he did the abomination of desolation, he's going to come back from the dead, and Irenaeus, who is before, I think, Suetonius' Lives of the 12 Caesars, I think it goes up to Marcus Aurelius or Commodus. So it's I don't know how many Caesars that is, but it's after Irenaeus. Irenaeus is going to talk about in his day how people think it's Nero, and he's saying no, because Nero was before John, and John wrote in the days of Domitian. He's going to say that. I mean, I think Papias is going to say that. Everybody said that John wrote in the days of Domitian. Nobody argued that John wrote in the days of Domitian until the post-Reformation era. Okay, nobody argued that. The only person who ever questioned the Book of Revelation was Origen, because that's where the millennium is clearly drawn out in Scripture, and he doesn't like that. And so, this guy is washed in Neoplatonism. He is a full-blown Gnostic. Okay, and so he is gonna put forward the first arguments that John the Apostle didn't write. Maybe it was written by John the Elder, because he's trying to lead people to the conclusion that it might not be canon. Okay. Which, even if John the Elder wrote it, John the Elder was one of the 70 apostles, and there's the early church actually believed that there's a couple of different theories that James and Jude were of the 70 apostles, and then there's a theory that the James and Jude in the Bible were actually James the Less, and then James or Thaddeus or Judas, but who they think is Simon the Zealot, okay? But they're actually James and Jude, the Lord's brothers, okay? They're there, and there's a whole pattern thing having to do with Josiah's 3 kids and Joseph's 3 kids, heading the church in Jerusalem. But anyways, that's a whole different story. So what I'm going to show you is I'm going to go from the beginning, and I'm going to show you how these guys systematically, in order, this is in historical order, looked at the millennium, okay? Now, I'm telling you from the Bible, and this is all in my book, you had Jesus, basically after the, Antiochian thing, after the supposed abomination of desolation happened in Antiochus' day, calling out the abomination of desolation as a future thing, okay? Then you have Paul, who everything he says in 1 Corinthians about the resurrection, everything he says in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians about the rapture and about the abomination of desolation, he is pulling all of that from Daniel. Everything he's saying is basically coming from Daniel 11 and 12, okay? It's obviously going to be hinted at in other parts of Daniel, but that's where it's from. And then John's revelation is going to basically, I mean, it's coming directly from the Lord, so it's not like John is pulling this, but it's going to pull a lot of material from Ezekiel and Daniel. Those are the primary two. And then obviously you're going to have lots of other prophets involved. You're going to have stuff from Joel. I mean, just all of them are involved in it. But the main two are going to be Ezekiel and Daniel, because Ezekiel talks about the Gog-Magog invasion, talks about the millennium, talks about the millennial temple, and then Daniel talks about the 70th week of Daniel and the Antichrist. So Ezekiel is going to talk about a 7-year period after the Gog-Magog war, but it's going to be before his prophecy about the millennial temple. And then Daniel is going to talk about that 70th week over and over and over again. And the way these guys are going to do it is they're going to, and Hippolytus is going to lay this out, I'm going to show it to you, is that they understand it as a dual fulfillment of the last part, okay? And this is, the proof text for this is when you go right into Daniel in the first prophecy where he's interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and he talks about the 4 successive kingdoms, which everybody understood to be Babylon, Persia, Greece, then Rome. And when he talks about the Roman kingdom, and then he talks about the iron mixed with clay, those were understood way back then as 2 distinct kingdoms, and Hippolytus is going to write that down. And when he says in the days of their kingdom, it was understood that there's two iterations of the Roman kingdom, okay? That's why he's going to say their kingdom, because Daniel's already laid out for Nebuchadnezzar. These are successive kingdoms, and we see Nebuchadnezzar's end, then the Persians start, then that end, then the Greeks start, then the Greeks end, and then the Romans start, okay? In terms of controlling the Middle East, okay? So anyways, this is going to be ANF Book 1, and the main books that are going to talk about this stuff are going to be, you're going to get Barnabas, and then you're going to get the Didache, which is not here. So we're going to pull open the Didache. The Didache is actually in the Apostles' Constitutions, which is a forged document, and they claim it's, Peter speaking, and the other apostles are all there with Paul. But it's a forged document, but it's drawing from the Didache. But the Didache is basically, if you go down to the very last part of the Didache, watchfulness and the coming of the Lord, I'm just going to read this and interpret it for you. He says, watch for your life's sake, let not your lamps be quenched, nor your loins be loosed, but be ready, for you know not which hour the Lord comes. So that's it's not, the dispensationalists are going to call it the doctrine of imminency. It's not a doctrine of imminency. He's saying watch for these signs because you don't know what hour the Lord comes, okay? He's basically saying the Lord has not laid out to say, hey, this is going to happen in this many years, so watch for the signs. He's not saying the Lord could come at any moment without any signs, okay? And here's the signs they're going to give, the same signs that Jesus gives. This is all being drawn from Matthew. Almost everything in the Didache, you have evidence in the Didache that the apostles talking about people no longer eating meat sacrificed to idols, because this is basically going to be called later the apostles' teaching to the Gentiles. That gets added to this, so they actually have textual evidence that was added to it, which means the original was written before the Council of Jerusalem. Okay, so this is something that is very early on. They're using it to evangelize probably Jews, Hellenistic Jews, and Gentiles. There is nothing about keeping Jewish custom in this. There is a line about supporting prophets. If you see this, it says, but every true prophet that will abide among you is worthy of support, so also is a true teacher himself, worthy as a workman of this support. Every first fruit, therefore, the products of the winepress, the threshing floor, the ox, the sheep, give first to the prophets, for they are your high priests. Okay. Notice it says to the prophets. Okay. This was the idea of taking care of itinerant prophets and teachers if they're coming among you and they're prophesying truly, and if they're teaching, because you didn't always have your bishops were not always like refined teachers. They would do readings of the scriptures and the apostolic letters, but they weren't always exegetes and theologians and eloquent speakers and stuff like this. So your itinerant teachers were your professionals, okay? And they would go around and teach, okay? So he was talking about this to take care of them, and then the later Catholics, Ignatius is going to say that your bishop is the high priest, and that's where they're going to get tithing to your bishop from, okay? You're going to find that first pop up in Hippolytus's apostolic tradition. He's not saying tithe, but he is talking about giving them silver. And if you see this, it says, you take the first fruit and give it to the prophets, and money, silver, clothing, and every possession. In other words, give them what they need to live, okay? If these guys are coming among you and they're prophesying and teaching, like, don't let them be poor, okay? So you see this is very early on stuff. This is stuff that's going to reflect issues they're having with false prophets already. You have people like Simon Magus running around from the beginning as a false prophet, okay? And then talks about assembling on the Lord's Day. These guys are actually, the Lord's Day was always Sunday. It was always the first day of the week, and Barnabas is going to get into it. It's not because, listen, it's not because these guys are anti-Jewish. It's not because they're replacement theologians. It's because in the Jewish communities, most of these guys would still not work on the Sabbath so as not to offend the Jews, okay? So when are they going to gather with the Christians? The answer is on the Lord's Day. They would gather on a different day, because if you had a separate meeting where these guys are gathering, while the Jews are all meeting in the synagogue, that's going to be war really early on. So they would honor the Sabbath, and then they would meet on the Lord's Day, okay? And that's the first day of the week. But it also mystically represents the 8th day, because if there's 7,000 years is 7 days, the 8th day is eternity, and that's when we're finally circumcised from this flesh, and we live in our eternity. Everybody lives in their eternal bodies at the end of the millennium in the eternal state, okay? Barnabas is going to get into that. We're going to get into all that in a minute. So anyways, you see that they gather on the Lord's Day. That was always understood to be Sunday, because the Lord appeared to them like 3 times after his resurrection on a Sunday, okay? So for you Seventh-day Adventists who are like all hung up on Sabbath, nobody's stopping you from keeping the Sabbath. But understand, the Mosaic command for the Sabbath was you to stay home with your family and not do any work. It's not to go gather in your church service on Saturday, okay? Never was. The Pharisees added that later on, okay? Because that's when they changed the law to make it that you could go 2,000 paces from your house so you could come to synagogue and pay them money to basically learn from them. That was their gig, okay? And that's how a lot of our church services developed. Anyways, notice he says, but often shall you come together seeking the things that are befitting for your souls, for the whole time your faith will not profit you, if it will not be made perfect in the last time. For in the last days false prophets and corrupters will be multiplied, the sheep shall be turned to wolves, and love shall be turned into hate. When lawlessness shall increase, they shall hate and persecute and betray one another, and then shall appear the world deceiver as the Son of God. So very clearly, it was always understood that the Antichrist is going to show up and claim to be Jesus, okay? And it says, and he shall do signs and wonders, and the earth shall be delivered into his hands, and he shall do iniquitous things, which have never yet come to pass since the beginning. Then shall the creation of men come to the fire of trial, and shall many be made to stumble, and shall perish. But they that shall endure in their faith shall be saved from under the curse itself. Okay? So he is literally talking about the resurrection and the rapture here. This is a paraphrase of Matthew 24, okay? Then shall the signs appear, the signs of truth. First, the sign of an outspreading in heaven. So that's the sign of the Lord appearing in the clouds. Then the sign of a sound of a trumpet. That's going to be in Matthew 24 and 1 Thessalonians 4. And third, the resurrection of the dead. That's going to be obviously, the angels gathering the elect, and that's going to be in Daniel 12, where the dead are raised at that time. It's going to be Revelation chapter 12. And it's going to be Revelation chapter 14. That's the dead are raised, and those who are alive are raptured. And then in 13 is going to be the abomination of desolation. And Hippolytus is going to get into all this, okay? Then it says, the Lord shall come and all... This says, then the sign of the sound of the trumpet, then the resurrection of the dead, yet of not all. And this is why. They're not espousing a millennium yet, because it hasn't been scripturally written down until John. It's going to be hinted at in Peter when he talks about the day with the Lord as 1,000 years. And then he's going to talk about the beginning and the end of the millennium, and then John's going to write it down. But Peter hasn't. This is before Second Peter's written. Second Peter's not going to be written until 64. This is probably in the 40s. Okay. So then John is going to write the Revelation in the 90s, where he flat out spells out the 1,000 years with Jesus coming in the beginning of it like a thief, and then at the end of it, the elements are burned up with a fervent heat, because the New Jerusalem sends out fire and destroys the universe. Okay. Then he says the Lord. So he says. The resurrection of the dead, but not all, because it was understood that they're going to be dead raised at the rapture, and then other dead, and that's the white throne judgment, which Revelation hasn't been written yet, but you have it in Matthew. So it's an indistinct amount of time. It's not been spelled out that it's 1,000 years yet, but they know there's going to be the rapture here, and then the judgment of all the righteous and the wicked over here, okay? So he says, but the Lord shall come with his saints with him. And so in other words, not all, only the saints are going to be resurrected at this time. And then he said, and then shall the world see the Lord coming with the clouds of heaven. Okay? So he's taking you right up to the rapture. And that's Revelation 14. Okay, so that's the Didache. Okay, this is written before the destruction of Jerusalem. Now get to Barnabas, which is going to be written to the Jews in Alexandria right after the destruction of Jerusalem. And this was universally held until the Reformers started tearing it up. And here's why. The Reformers didn't believe this for two reasons. One, they're all amillennial, and this is very clearly millennial. And two, it's because they didn't like allegorical interpretation. They're trying to get to literal, historical, grammatical interpretation because the Catholics are abusing allegory so much from the time of Origen on to just make stuff mean whatever you want it to mean by using allegory. So the Reformers are going to be so anti-allegory that you're going to actually start finding papers written in the seminaries in the 20th century where people are trying to make sense of Paul's use of allegory in Galatians and judge whether or not Paul is interpreting the Bible correctly. Okay, that's how the Reformers were very arrogant. Like when you read their stuff, like I'm reading Philip Schaff's, and they're gonna read something from the early church where they talk about the millennium and be like, but obviously he was mistaken. That's what these guys are gonna say. They're so arrogant. Like they're in this lane that is just like we're right and the Roman Catholics are wrong. They barely know anything about orthodoxy. They don't know their scriptures that well, and they don't know their church fathers that well. And as they interpret this stuff, which is finding out that they're wrong, they're going to basically be like, oh, he was right on this, but he was wrong like on this because he was just ignorant. And it's like, well, what is your reason? What is your scriptural reason? What is your historical reason? And they won't have one. They'll just keep asserting stuff like that, okay? It's super annoying, but Calvinists are Calvinists. I mean, what are you going to do? So anyways, when you get to... again, you're going to get to Barnabas, and Barnabas is a pretty long epistle. It's going to get a lot of stuff having to do with the new covenant. It's going to get into the fact that we don't do, again, this is the apostle Barnabas, okay, who hangs out with Paul. This is the one who's chosen to tell them that, you know, the Gentiles can be brought in, some of the first ministries to the Gentiles, and they're going to be very clear that they don't have to keep the Sabbath, okay? Very clear that they don't have to keep the Sabbath. We keep the Lord's Day. Those were things that were for another time, and that's why you have no teaching on Sabbath keeping in the entire New Testament, okay? So these guys are going to... So this is in Barnabas. Further, also it is written concerning the Sabbath and the Decalogue, which the Lord spoke face to face. And Barnabas is a Levite. He knows this Jewish stuff really well. He says to Moses on Mount Sinai, and sanctify the Sabbath of the Lord with clean hands and a pure heart. Then he says, my sons, keep the Sabbath, I will cause my mercy to rest on them. The Sabbath is mentioned at the beginning, and thus, and this is why I'm getting into this, not to tear on Seventh-day Adventists, but to show you his 7,000-year thing, okay? And the Lord made 6 days the work of his hands, and made an end on the seventh day, and rested it, and sanctified it. Attend, my children, to the meaning of this expression, he finished in 6 days. This implies that the Lord will finish all things in 6,000 years, for with him, for a day is with him 1,000 years. Now, then he says, and he himself testifies, saying, behold, today will be as 1,000 years. Okay? So let's see, 223, Codex Sinaiticus says the day of the Lord shall be as 1,000 years. Okay? That's what the Codex Sinaiticus reads, apparently, on 2 Peter. The day of the Lord shall be as 1,000 years. This is 2 Peter's version, okay? So remember, this is going to be the same thing as in the Septuagint. This is what these guys are usually using. It's not saying remember, the same word for like is the same word as. So it's not saying that a day with the Lord is similar to 1,000 years. He's saying a day with the day of the Lord is as 1,000 years, okay? So anyways, he says, this implies that the Lord will finish all things in 6,000 years, for a day with him is 1,000 years, for he himself testifies, saying, behold, today will be like 1,000 years, okay? Therefore, my children, in 6 days, that is in 6,000 years, all things will be finished. And he rested on the seventh day, meaning that when his son coming again shall destroy the time of the wicked man, and judge the ungodly, and change the sun and the moon and the stars, then he shall truly rest on the seventh day, okay? Now remember, the sun's going to turn to darkness, the moon's going to turn to blood, the stars are going to fall from heaven, the earth is going to turn. There's going to be a pole shift, dude. It's coming, okay? There's even like weird, like Gnostic, weird occultic guys that are saying this is going to happen, but like it's because it's in the Bible. The devil knows it's going to happen. And then he says, moreover, he says, thou shalt sanctify it with pure hands and a pure heart. If therefore anyone can now sanctify the day which the Lord has sanctified, except the pure in heart in all things, except that he is pure in heart in all things, we are deceived. I don't know what that means. If therefore anyone can now sanctify the day which the Lord has sanctified, except he is pure in heart of all things, we are deceived. Behold, therefore, certainly then one properly resting sanctifies it, and we ourselves, having received the promise, wickedness no longer existing, and all things having been made new by the Lord, shall be able to work righteousness. Then we shall be able to sanctify it, having been sanctified ourselves. So, this is what he's saying. So when he's saying sanctify the Sabbath, okay, he's quoting the prophets, and I don't remember which prophet that he's quoting, about sanctifying the Sabbath, okay? He's saying you shall sanctify it with pure hands and a clear heart. What he's saying is we don't have pure hands and a clear heart. He's talking about the 1,000-year Sabbath, because right now we don't have pure hands and a clear heart until we're born again, and then we're resurrected in a perfect body, okay? So he's saying that for the Jews was never meant to be literal. It was meant to be an exercise towards a figure of a future thing. That's what he's going to say, okay? And then he's going to say, for he says, your new moons and your Sabbath I cannot endure. You perceive how he speaks, your present Sabbaths are not acceptable to me. So this is what Barnabas is going to call the circumcised understanding of the law of the new covenant, okay? And so he says, but that which I have made, namely is when giving rest to all things, I shall make a beginning of the 8th day. That is the beginning of another world, okay? So Sunday is meant to represent the 8th day, not just the first day of the week. Okay, and it's meant to represent an eternity with Christ, okay? And so he says, wherefore, again, we keep the 8th day with joyfulness, the day on which Jesus rose again from the dead, okay? So that's very clear. He's talking about the day of the Lord, that's Sunday, and they consider it the 8th day because that's the day after. And I got all this from the Bible. Like, this is me reading the Bible and just seeing what the Bible's saying if you're understanding these types and allegories and uses of numbers. Barnabas gets this, and this is while the apostles are still writing canon, okay? And it says, and he himself manifests himself and ascended into the heavens, okay? So very clear, he's saying Sunday represents the 8th day. The 8th day is basically what's after the 7,000 years, which is at the end of the millennium, okay? This is what he's saying, and then John about 20, he's writing this in response to the Jews who fled Jerusalem, because a lot of people would have believed when they read Jesus about Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, that this is the end. This is it. This is the last days. But Jesus didn't show up to rapture anybody. And so you have all these dejected Jews and Jewish Christians who thought this is the last days, and they're like, no, this is not the last days. There's a future thing coming. And so he's letting them know about this 6,000 years thing so that they understand that there's a future thing coming. Now here's the hitch. These guys are using the Septuagint, which disagrees with the Masoretic text on how old the earth is. And they think there's about 5,500 years before Christ came. And so you're going to find people in the 2nd century who are going to be like, yeah, there's about 5,800 years done now. And like, they think Jesus is going to come back within a couple hundred years. Okay, that's what they think, and it's going to be in their writings after that. So, so that's what he's saying about the 7,000 years. And Irenaeus, who is not influenced by this, you have no reference to this whatsoever in Irenaeus. He's going to get the same thing, and he's taught by Polycarp, who's taught by John, okay? So when we go to Irenaeus, first of all, if we go to Papias, these are all fragmentary sayings of Papias that were collected and accumulated from other people. Now, Papias had written 5 books that were written based on testimony that were given by these 2 guys, John the Elder and Aristion, who were of the 70. Aristion is going to be the guy who writes the long ending of Mark, and John is going to be the guy who they thought wrote the epistles, 2nd and 3rd John, okay? But they're actually going to figure out, no, these guys actually testified that these were John's epistles, okay? But But Papias knows these guys personally. Papias is friends with Polycarp, who's going to teach Irenaeus. And so that's how Irenaeus is going to have some of these things. Most of these things come from either Eusebius or Irenaeus, who apparently Irenaeus had information about him from Polycarp. There's no reference that he had his 5 books, but maybe he did. Eusebius seems to have access to his 5 books. But Eusebius is going to call him out as an idiot for believing in the millennium, because Eusebius is a follower of Origen. Okay? So we look at the stuff that he gives us, and it's not a ton of stuff, but there's this line in here that Papias says, and this is going to be about the millennium. Okay? And so he says, as the elders who saw John the Lord remembered that he had said how the Lord had taught in regard to those times, he said, the days will come in which vines will grow, each having 10,000 branches, and each branch 10,000 twigs, and each twig 10,000 shoots, and every one of the shoots 10,000 clusters, and every one of the clusters 10,000 grapes, and every grape when pressed will give 25 measures of wine. And when all the saints shall lay hold of a cluster, shall one cry out, I'm a better cluster, take me, bless the Lord through me. In like manner, he said, of the grain, the wheat will produce 10,000 ears. Okay, same thing of the grain. And then he says, testimony is born of these things in writing by Papias, an ancient man who was a hearer of John and friend of Polycarp. This is not John the Apostle, this is John the Elder. Okay, but John the Elder served underneath John the Apostle in Ephesus, and that's why they're both buried there, okay? And so, but he says, in those same times, the wolf shall lay down the lamb. So they're describing literally the millennium, like literally the animals are going to get along, okay? And then Judas is going to ask about this. So this is supposedly a story that came from John from a private conversation, okay? Because remember, John himself is going to say he could write a ton more about Jesus, but all the books in the world couldn't contain them. He wrote what he wrote, okay? But these are people who knew John. And so he says, now these things are credible to believers. So this is what Papias says. And then he says, and Judas the traitor, says he, not believing and asking, how shall such growths be accomplished by the Lord? The Lord said, they that see shall come to them. Because he knows Judas is not going to be part of this. So he says, they that see will. He's basically like saying, those who are going to be resurrected will see. Okay? And then he says, these then are the times mentioned by the prophet Isaiah, and the wolf should lie down with the lamb. So this is all describing the millennium. Okay? I don't know if you guys are on millennial, so correct me if I'm wrong on that. But this is, I'm building up a case for where it shifts with Clement and Origen. Okay? So then you're going to get into Irenaeus. Irenaeus is going to write 5 really long books against heresies. You're probably looking at like 400 or 500 pages for all this stuff. In book 5, he's going to get into the Antichrist a lot, and he's going to deal with the number 666. He's going to deal with the Antichrist name, when it was written, a whole bunch of stuff like that. Let's see. Because he's dealing with the resurrection, the end times, proofs of the resurrection from Isaiah and Ezekiel. He's dealing with heresies that are against the resurrection, because these heresies are based in Stoic philosophy, Epicurean philosophy, and Platonic philosophy, which Epicurean philosophy believes everything's physical, and we can do whatever we want because everything's just determined. Stoics believe that everything is physical, but the Logos is like God, but it like inhabits the physical universe, and the universe is eternal, and we all reincarnate back and forth from it. And it's basically Brahman. It's basically the exact same thing as Brahman. And then the Platonists are going to believe that there's a physical world and then an ideal world beyond that, and it's all eternal, and that the ideal is perfect, and then the physical world is corrupt. And Neoplatonists, which haven't been invented yet, are going to suggest that God would never come up with a physical body. The Docetists are going to say that because physical is corrupt, and God wouldn't put on something corrupt. So they're against the resurrection of the dead being physical and real, and they're against Jesus coming in a physical flesh. And that's why Paul is going to deal with Epicureans and Stoics in Corinth, because if you remember, right before he starts the church at Corinth, he's arguing with Epicureans and Stoics in Athens, which is just right up the road from Corinth, okay? So those were common philosophies in those days. Stoicism was very popular in Greece, and Epicureanism was very popular in Rome, and then the Romans colonized Corinth. Because reasons, I don't remember why. And of course a bunch of Jews get kicked out of Rome, and what philosophy do you think they're going to bring with them? Epicureanism. And that's why he's dealing with that at Corinth, okay? So anyways, he is going to say that, let's see here. John and Daniel have predicted the dissolution and desolation of the Roman Empire. This is Irenaeus, okay? And Hippolytus is his student, okay? So he says, which shall precede the end of the world and the eternal kingdom of Christ. So notice he's saying John and Daniel have predicted the dissolution and desolation of the Roman Empire. This is not Israel, okay? Which shall precede the end of the world and the eternal kingdom of Christ. The Gnostics are refuted, these tools of Satan who invent another father different from the Creator, okay? These guys would have these long titles on every chapter and stuff like this. This is how they wrote, okay? It says, in still a clearer light, John in the Apocalypse indicated to the Lord's disciples what shall happen in the last times concerning the 10 kings who shall arise. So the 10 kings are in the last days, whom the empire which now rules the earth shall be partitioned. So the way these guys are going to believe this is that Rome keeps expanding until it takes over the entire world, because it runs the known world now. They don't see Rome collapsing and then coming back. They see it as just continuing to expand, and then it's going to be partitioned into 10 kingdoms, because the Romans would partition the empire in two and stuff like that to rule it when it got too big, okay? So anyways, it says the empire will now be partitioned. He teaches us that when the 10 horns shall be, which were seen by Daniel, telling us that it had been said to him, the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, who have received no kingdom as of yet, but shall receive power as if kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind and give their strength and power to the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, because he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings. It is manifest, therefore, that these potentates, he who is to come shall slay 3 and subject the remainder to his power, and that he shall himself be the 8th among them. Okay? And they shall lay Babylon to waste. Remember, Babylon's still a city right now. It's never been destroyed. And burn her with fire, and shall give their kingdom to the beast, and put the church to flight. After they shall be destroyed by the coming of the Lord, or after that they shall be destroyed by the coming of the Lord. Okay? For that every kingdom must be divided, and thus must come to ruin. So notice he's saying, Daniel is saying that these 10 kings are going to be in the last days. Okay, Daniel's saying that. So you have to take that prophecy of the 4 beasts and the 10 horns, and you have to apply that to the last days. That's how these guys understand it. Okay, and he says, and the Lord declares that he says, every kingdom divided against itself is brought into desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. It must be therefore that the kingdom, the city, and the house is divided into 10. For this reason he has already foreshadowed the partition and division which will take place. Daniel also says particularly that the end of the 4th kingdom consists of the toes. So they're going to distinguish between the legs of iron and then the feet that are toes, partly strong, partly brittle, okay? And he says it consists of the toes of the image seen by Nebuchadnezzar, upon which came the stone cut out with hands, as he himself does say. The feet were indeed one part iron and another part clay, until the stone was cut out with the hands, and struck the image upon the iron and the clay and the feet, and dashed them into pieces, even to the end. Then afterwards, when interpreting this, as thou sawest the feet and the toes, partly indeed of iron and partly indeed of clay and partly of iron, the king shall be divided, and there shall be in it a root of iron, as thou saw iron mixed with baked clay, and the toes were indeed one part iron and the other part clay. The 10 toes, therefore, are these 10 kings, among whom the kingdom shall be partitioned. So this is yet future. And of whom the indeed shall be strong and active or energetic. Others again shall be sluggish and useless and shall not agree. And also Daniel says, some part of the kingdom shall be strong and some part shall be broken of it. And as thou saw iron mixed with the baked clay, there shall be minglings among the human race, and shall be no cohesion with one another, just as iron cannot be welded unto pottery ware. And since an end shall take place, he says, in the days of those kings shall the God of heaven raise up a kingdom that shall never decay, and his kingdom shall not be left for another people. It shall break in pieces and shatter all kingdoms, and it shall itself be exalted forever. And thou sawest the stone was cut without hands from the mountain, and break into pieces the baked clay, the iron, the brass, the silver, and the gold. God has pointed. So notice it's the statue too. He's making it very clear it's the statue and it's the beast from Daniel. Okay, he says God has pointed out the king, what shall come to pass after these things, and the dream is true and the interpretation trustworthy. Okay, so notice he's saying this, and I want to make this point clear. He is not refuting an alternative eschatology, because nobody is coming up with a Neoplatonic eschatology yet. He's writing around 180 AD. This is when this is published, And Clement is going to be the first one to suggest that Daniel's 70th weeks are done. And Clement allegorizes everything. He's mixing Pythagoreanism, he's mixing Stoicism, he's mixing Neoplatonism. And part of what the Pythagoreans would do is they would just make up allegories to get rid of stuff that literally doesn't make sense and logically doesn't make sense. They'll say that's just an allegory and make it up into something else. So Clement started doing that. Origen's going to take it to the next level, and Origen's going to come up with amillennialism. But Clement is about he's a good 30 to 40 years younger than Irenaeus. Okay, so Irenaeus is going to die right around the turn of the 3rd century, and that's when Clement really starts to get known. He is teaching in a school in Alexandria. He's going to write a Stromata. It's not going to be widely published, but he is going to be the first person to start allegorizing the scriptures and getting other meanings out of it. And he's going to put ideas forward that lead towards universalism. He's not going to say that. And then Origen is going to do that, okay? And again, these guys are going to be, this is going to be between about 25 and 50 years after this, okay? To this point, there is nobody, and I mean heretics and everybody, there is nobody who is refuting this eschatology, okay? Nobody. This is eschatology that you have the stamp of Barnabas on it, you have the stamp of Papias on it, you have the stamp of John on it, you have the stamp of Polycarp on it, you have the stamp of Irenaeus on it, okay? Ignatius of Antioch doesn't write anything on eschatology, but I mean, you got the top boss dudes closest to John who wrote the Apocalypse all saying the same thing about a literal millennium and about a last days revived Roman Empire, okay? This did not come from Darby. Okay, this is 1600 years before Darby. Okay, so now he's going to keep going. He's saying, if therefore the great God showed future things by Daniel and confirmed them by his son. Now remember, the temple of Jerusalem has been destroyed now for over 100 years. Okay, and if the son is cut, which is cut out without hands, who shall destroy the temporal kingdoms and introduce an eternal one? Notice they're not looking at the kingdom as having already come. They're going, no. The kingdom is Jesus. And Jesus left without establishing a kingdom. He's going to come back and establish. That's why they asked him the question in Acts 1. Okay? He obviously didn't establish a kingdom. He was the kingdom. Okay? And then they understand the kingdom of heaven as a spiritual allegory of what's going on right now, but it's going to be established physically in the end. Okay? So he says, and introduce an eternal one, which is the resurrection of the just, as he declares the kingdom of God shall raise up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. Let those who confuted come to their senses, who reject the Creator, demiurgum, and do not agree with the prophets. So he's not writing this to argue against another alternative eschatology in the church. He's doing this to argue against the Gnostics, who are against a physical bodily resurrection. And so he's laying out there what the church believes. And the Gnostics are saying that the Creator, or they're going to see artificer, it's this word demiurge, is like a lower god. So basically they're going to say Jesus is like a lower god and there's 4 levels above him and we follow that higher god, okay, which is basically Platonism, okay? And then he says, and do not agree with the prophets who were sent beforehand from the same Father, of whom also the Lord came. So notice they're making it clear that there's just the Father and the Son. There's no other deities, there's no other layers to this that like the Gnostics are trying to put forward. And again, he spent chapters upon chapters exposing Valentinian Gnosticism and explaining how this is what they believe, okay? And then he says, and who assert that prophecies originated from diverse powers, okay? He's saying other powers. He's going to say Sophia sent the prophets outside of the knowledge of the Father and the Son, okay? He says, for those things which have been predicted by the Creator alike through all the prophets that has Christ fulfilled in the end, ministering his Father's will, completing the dispensations. Notice he says dispensations, with regard to the human race, okay? Let those persons therefore who, remember, this stuff was published before dispensationalism was really a thing. These writings were, a lot of this stuff was translated into English in the 1800s, okay? And he said, who blaspheme the Creator either by openly expressed words such as the disciples of Marcion or perversion of the sense of Scripture. Okay, let's get into more end time stuff. And he's going to say, so then he says the future judgment by Christ, communion with a separation from the divine being, the eternal punishment. So here he's going to get into everlasting fire being a specific thing. He's going to get into resurrection being a specific thing. He's not going to talk a lot about specifics. He does talk about the Antichrist, the distinction made between the righteous and the wicked, the future apostasy and the time of Antichrist. He's going to say that, let's see, He says, on this account, he says that upon those whose right hand are called the kingdom of heaven, but upon those on his left I will send an eternal fire. So that's Matthew 25. Then he's going to say, for when he, the Antichrist, has come, and of his own accord concentrates in his own person the apostasy, and accomplishes whatever he shall do in his own choice, sitting also in the temple of God, so that his dupes may adore him as the Christ. So notice he's saying he's going to sit in the temple of God. Remember, there's no temple right now, okay? And they're saying he's going to sit in the temple of God as Christ 100 years after the temple is destroyed. So they will say that he's going to rebuild it, and he's going to reestablish Israel. This did not come from the dispensationalists, okay? He's saying, wherefore they shall deservedly be cast in the lake of fire, and this will happen according to divine appointment, God by his prescience foreseeing all this, and at the proper time sending such a man, that they believe a lie, that they all may be judged who did not believe the church and consented to righteousness. So notice he's saying God is sending the Antichrist to consolidate all the unbelieving and deceive them into going to the lake of fire, okay? This is consistent with how God judges through the whole Old Testament. It says, whose coming John has thus described in the Apocalypse. The beast which thou saw is like a leopard, a bear, the mouth of a lion. So notice he's saying this conglomerate empire, which is just like named after the Daniel stuff, John describes in the Apocalypse, that's the Antichrist. One of his heads were slain unto death. The idea that Daniel was a commentary on things that happened in the past comes from the heretic Neoplatonist Porphyry, who was a contemporary with Origen, knew Origen, and was taught by the same founder of Neoplatonism that Origen was taught by, okay? So he is an opponent to Christianity. Where do you think he's getting the idea that Daniel is talking about past tense stuff instead of future stuff? Because it's not what any of these guys are saying. And the answer is he's getting it from Origen, okay? It's literally being promoted by an enemy of Christianity, an open enemy of Christianity. He is a Neoplatonist, he's not a Christian, and he knows Origen, and they're both taught by the same teacher, okay? So then he says, as one of his heads that were slain unto death, and they worship the dragon, yada, yada, yada. So this is all stuff that's over the Antichrist, straight out of the book of Revelation. He spake as a dragon. He does say that chapter 13, Revelation 13, maybe that's not him, maybe that's a later guy, is going to say that it is, he does a breakdown of every chapter of the book of Revelation. He's saying that's the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel in the last days. Then he says, this is what he's gonna confirm. This is a separate account, okay? He is not, because Irenaeus was always very careful to document where he's getting stuff from, especially if the guys are closer to the apostles than him, okay? He was very big on apostolic succession. There is no way in the world he would have got this from Barnabas and not cited Barnabas as having said it, okay? And he said, for as in as many days as the world was made, in so many thousand years shall it be concluded, okay? So in other words, in 7,000 years, the world's going to be over. And then he says, and for this reason, Scripture says, thus heaven and earth were finished, and all their adornment, and God brought to conclusion on the sixth day the works that he had made, and rested on the seventh day from his works. This is an account of the things formerly created, and it is also a prophecy of what is to come. For the day of the Lord is as 1,000 years. So this is separate from Barnabas, saying the exact same thing. And in the 6 days created, things were completed. It is evident, therefore, that they will come to an end in the 6,000th year. Okay? That is two witnesses. One is a witness of Jesus Christ, and one is a witness of the last remaining person who was taught by the Apostle John. Okay? Those are two pretty strong witnesses, okay, of a literal 1,000-year reign at the end of the millennium. And then he says, and therefore throughout all the time a man, having been molded by the beginning in the hands of God, the Son and the Spirit is made after the image and likeness of God, the chaff indeed, which is the apostasy, being cast away, but the wheat that is the wheat that is those who bring forth fruit to God in faith, being gathered into the barn. And for this cause tribulation is necessary for those who are saved, and having been after a manner broken up and rendered fire, and sprinkled over the patience of the word of God, and set on fire for purification, they may be fitted for a royal banquet. Okay, that's the marriage supper of the Lamb. He says, as a certain man of ours said when he was condemned to the wild beasts because of his testimony with respect to God, he's talking about Ignatius here, I am the wheat of God, I am the ground of the teeth of the wild beast, that I may be found the pure bread of God. He's talking about this certain man of ours who was condemned to wild beasts. That's Ignatius of Antioch, okay? So he's going to talk about, let's see, all things are created for the service of man, the deceits of wickedness, the apostate power of the Antichrist. He's going to talk about how the Antichrist deceives people. He's going to talk about the number 666. He's going to talk about how people in his own day are suspecting that it's Nero or trying to predict whose name it was. And he's going to say, if it was any of these guys who are yet living, John would have just told us, okay? It's not a secret code. These guys are not writing these massive prophecies and then afraid to cite somebody's name, okay? They're not doing that, okay? The book of Acts is calling out different Caesars and stuff. So they are protecting the apostles in their letters, and that's why you're not going to find living apostles named as doing stuff that the Jews would have wanted them killed for. Like you're not going to find John mentioned in Mark. You're not going to find John mentioned in Matthew for what he was doing and sneaking Peter in. You're going to find that in John because they're all dead and Israel's been or Jerusalem's been destroyed and there's nobody to kill John. We're finding out John had been sneaking into the Sanhedrin the whole time and getting secret information. Okay, so anyways. He gets into all this stuff and he's saying how it's like when he's talking about the image of the beast being like when Nebuchadnezzar set up the golden image and had them all bow down to it. This is what he's saying. Again, this is chapter 29 of book 5 of Irenaeus. Okay, so I'm just reading. These are just the last chapters of the last books of Irenaeus. There's like 5 or 6 chapters where he's dealing with the mansion, he's dealing with the millennium, he's explaining this stuff, and all of these are meant to be proofs about a literal resurrection and basically just lambaste the Gnostics, okay? So again, there is nobody, nowhere, anywhere that is refuting this. Nobody in the church, nobody outside of the church. The only thing that people outside of the churches are refuting is the literal bodily resurrection of the dead, okay? The Gnostics are trying to refute that, okay? So I mean, this is all this stuff was written between John the Apostle dying and the end of the second century. John dies right at the beginning of the second century, and this is at the end. Okay, so you're dealing with Ignatius dies around 110 to 115. Barnabas, they believe, died somewhere towards the end of the first century. Methodius died somewhere around 110, 115. They're both killed by Trajan. Polycarp is killed by Marcus Aurelius. He doesn't write on eschatology. Papias dies around 130. Justin Martyr's going to die at 165. He doesn't talk about eschatology. And then Irenaeus is going to die around 200. So these are the earliest people, okay? And the reason these guys are counted in book 1 is because all these guys have a direct connection to the apostles, or were suspected to. Barnabas was suspected to be the Barnabas, okay? That's why these are all kept. Justin Martyr is the oldest one in Irenaeus, but Justin Martyr knew Ignatius, and he's the first real Christian expositor. He's a first real Christian prolific writer. He's a martyr, and he's the first Christian philosopher, okay? Irenaeus is taught by Polycarp, who's taught by John. That's why these guys are all collected together. They're very important writings, okay? So that's the second century. Now we're in the third century, and we get into Clement, okay? Now these other guys, you're not going to have much in the end times about these guys, because most of these guys are dealing with arguing Christianity as being compatible with Stoicism. They're arguing a lot of stuff about the nature of God and Christ, and because they're trying to make that sound like Stoicism and work. And then you get to Clement of Alexandria, and he's just going to write a ton of stuff about a ton of stuff, okay? And at one point, he's going to talk about how people calculated Daniel in his day, okay? Now remember, these guys have a Septuagint, and if you compare the Septuagint to the Masoretic on the timelines of the people between Noah and Abraham, they're drastically different. There's like 100 years added for each person. And so you're going to get like, this is going to be off by like 1,000 years. He's off by like about, but I mean, he's really off by about 1,500 years. But this is 200 AD, so we're going to say he's off by like, like 1,300 years. Okay. So it says from the captivity of Babylon. This is Daniel's 70th week. Okay. It says from the captivity of Babylon, which took place in the time of Jeremiah, the prophet was fulfilled. Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled what was spoken by Daniel the prophet as followed. Okay. So he's going to say Daniel's 70 weeks begins when Babylon was taken captive, okay? 70 weeks are determined upon those people and upon thy holy city, okay? Now, I don't agree with this. This is just what Clement says. It says, to finish the transgression, to seal sins, to wipe out and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring everlasting righteousness and seal the vision of the prophet, to anoint the Holy of Holies. Now, therefore, understand that from the going forth of the commanding an answer to be given for Jerusalem to be built to Christ the Prince. So notice the command, okay? From the going forth of the command for Jerusalem to be built to Christ the Prince are 7 weeks and 62 weeks, and the street shall be built again in the wall, and the times shall be expended. Okay? Our translation, even in troublous times, he's reading from a Septuagint. It apparently reads differently. Okay? Remember, all of our Bibles now, including King James, have Masoretic text. They, from Luther on, had the Masoretic text. Catholics still, some of them use the Septuagint. Some are going to use the Vulgate, which I think is going to be, correct me if I'm wrong, but it might be based on Hebrew, but it's not the Masoretic text. Okay? It's Jerome's Hebrew interpretation. And he says, and after the 62 weeks, the anointing shall be overthrown, and judgment shall not be in him, and he shall destroy the city and the sanctuary along with the coming prince. Okay? This is his interpretation of Daniel from the Septuagint. But notice how he's saying the 70 weeks begin with, it's fulfilled when from the captivity of Babylon. And he's saying 70 weeks are determined. And he's reading right here, it starts with a command to build Jerusalem, and then you have 7 weeks and 62 weeks, okay? And then he says, and then he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the middle of the week the sacrifice and oblation shall be taken away, and in the holy place shall be an abomination of desolations until the consummation of time shall be, when the consummation is a sign for desolation. So this consummation of time is not in the Bible, okay? It's the consummation is literally the consuming of the earth by fire, okay? It's not talking about the consummation of time. So he says, the consummation shall be a sign for desolation, and in the midst of the week he shall make the incense of the sacrifice cease, and on the wing of destruction, even till the consummation, like the destruction of the oblation. Okay? Now the oblation is the burnt offering, and he should have known in the context that the consummation is not consuming time, it's consuming the Antichrist kingdom. Okay? And then he says that the temple accordingly was built in 7 weeks. Okay, so he's saying there's 7 weeks until the temple's built, even though he's saying he just read it where it says it's from the command to build Jerusalem. Okay, is evident for it is written in Esdras. Okay, so that's Ezra. And then he says, and thus Christ became King of the Jews, reigning in Jerusalem in the fulfillment of the 7 weeks. Okay, this is going to be the first guy who claims that the 70th week of Daniel is fulfilled. Okay, this is going to be around probably somewhere between 200 and 213 AD. After 213, he goes into hiding in the persecution of, I forget, Severus, I think. Septimus Severus, I think. He's going to go into hiding, and he doesn't have access to the printing and publishing infrastructure of Alexandria anymore. He's in hiding in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem, remember, has been destroyed. So it's not a big city with a bunch of resources now, and he doesn't publish anything after that. Okay, this was probably kept in the school in Alexandria where he wrote it, and it was never published until later. You know, some people posthumously publish it because he was famous. Okay, so here's the point: he's reading all this, and you and I know this doesn't work with any timeline. Okay, this doesn't work. If he is saying that the 7 years is going, or the first 49 weeks is the building of the temple, which we know it took 46 years, not 49. He's saying then just the 62 weeks is going to be from the building of the wall until Jesus comes, and then the 70th week is fulfilled. Okay, nothing that he says makes sense, because he's honestly a horrible scholar when it comes to certain things, and chronology is one of them. Okay. So here's why. I have done the math on it on a 360-day year, and I've done the math on it on a 365-day year. From the decree to build the temple, and I am counting from when Nehemiah is sent with the materials, to build Jerusalem, to complete the walls and the gates of Jerusalem. When he's sent with those materials from Xerxes, or Artaxerxes, I think, it's going to take you to 38 AD if you use a 365-day year, and 31 AD if you don't. Now remember, the prophecy says after 69 weeks, Messiah is cut off. So it doesn't have to be exactly after. We agree on that. And you say 69 and a half, okay? Well, I got it in 31 AD, and I have him being crucified in 33 AD. So that's after it, okay? If your 70th week is out in the future, he can be crucified any time after the 69th week, and that prophecy is fulfilled, and then the 70th week is out in the future, which these guys totally believe, okay? So if it's a 360-day year, which Daniel makes it clear it is by the 42 months and by the 1,260 days, we know they're counting a 360-day year for the prophecy. So if I'm counting a 360-day year times again, 69 weeks, it's going to take you to 31 AD, okay? So I know you hold to 28 AD. I don't get that. I get John beginning his baptismal ministry in 29 AD. I know it all comes from Jesus being about 29 or about 30, but that doesn't mean he's 29. He's 34. That's what I have, okay? So that's what I have. That's what I've got from doing my own calculations. We can compare math. I'd be happy to do that with you. But listen how he's going to calculate this out. It's not going to make any sense, okay? Then he says, and thus Christ became King of the Jews, reigning in Jerusalem in the fulfillment of the 7 weeks. And he says, in the 62 weeks, the whole of Judea was quiet and without wars, okay? This right here is bullcrap, because in this 62 weeks, you have the Maccabean revolts. You have, there's so many wars. The whole of Judea, this is just so weird. In the 62 weeks, the whole of Judea was quiet without wars. This guy has to be a horrible historian if he thinks between the building of the temple in Jerusalem and Christ coming, there were no wars in Jerusalem and Judea. You got Antiochus Epiphanes, you got the wars between the Seleucids and Ptolemies that definitely ran through Judea. You've got the Maccabees, and then you're going to have the Jewish revolts that lead to the Hasmoneans being replaced with the Herodian dynasty, and Jerusalem actually gets sacked by Pompey. Okay, so this is weird that he says this. Just shows a lack of intellectual credibility in my opinion. So, anyways, and he says, "Christ our Lord, the Holy of Holies." So now he's going to say the Holy of Holies is Christ. He's the first person to ever say that. Okay. Having come and fulfilled the vision and the prophecy, was anointed in his flesh by the Holy Spirit of his Father. Okay, so wait a minute. This he's saying is at the beginning of Christ's ministry, but he's saying the 70th week is at the end, and he's saying it's 70 weeks to anoint the Holy of Holies. Okay, and he's saying Christ is the Holy of Holies, and that happened at the beginning of the weeks. And then he says, in those 62 weeks, as the prophet said, in 1 week he was he Lord. None of this makes sense. Okay, none of what he's saying makes sense, because he's basically, are you saying Jesus had a 7-year ministry? And then he says, listen to this, the half of the week Nero held sway. Okay, Nero is not emperor until long after Jesus is dead. This is how bad this guy's doctrine is. Okay, he's saying the half of the week Nero held sway, and in the holy city of Jerusalem placed the abomination. That never happened. And in the half of the week he was taking away, and Otho, Galba, and Vitellius, and Vespasian rose in the supreme power. So now he's fast forwarding to, he's taking the 70 weeks and somehow saying it's over during the end of Christ's ministry, and now he's stretching it to 70 AD. Okay? And then he says, and destroyed Jerusalem and desolated the holy place. Okay? So he's literally saying the abomination of desolation was Nero, which is in the 60s, and then 70 AD is Vespasian, and he's basically saying the half of the week Nero had held sway, okay? And he's saying, because remember how there's rumors circulating around that Nero is the Antichrist from Irenaeus' day. He is going to specifically speak out against that, okay? So he's taking these circulating conjectures, and somehow he's basically saying, in 7 weeks, in the 70th week, so this is 7 years, that Jesus was Lord, and he's going to say that's when he was anointed by the Holy Spirit. So he's putting it there, and then he's also putting it in 70 AD. And this is what's dumb about this preterist idea, okay? The earliest preterists, the earliest people who said Daniel's 70th weeks were fulfilled, are saying that it was fulfilled in the destruction of Jerusalem. They still have a gap between the 69th and the 70th week. They just put the gap between Jesus' ministry in 70 AD instead of between Jesus' ministry in the last days. You still have a gap between the 69th and 70th week, no matter how you spin it, okay? So I don't see how anybody can argue this, okay? But this is the earliest reference that you have of Daniel's 70th weeks being fulfilled, and anybody else who follows is going to be built on him. Okay, it's going to be built on him or built on Origen, okay? Because these guys ran the first Christian university, basically, okay? And so everybody is learning from them. And then he says, and Vespasian rose to the supreme power and destroyed Jerusalem and desolated the holy place, and that such are the facts of the case is clear to him who is able to understand, as the prophet said. what the crap are you talking about? Like, this is now he's going, listen, now this is how he's going to document the history with it, okay? He just said a bunch of stuff that makes no sense whatsoever. But now let's see how he documents it. He's saying, on the completion then of the 11th year, in the beginning of the following, in the reign of Joachim, occurred the carrying away captive of Babylon to Nebuchadnezzar the king, in the 7th year of his reign over the Assyrians, in the 2nd year of the reign over Bophres over the Egyptians, in the archonship of Philip of Athens, in the 1st year of the 48th Olympiad. Now, he has access to the Alexandrian library. They have tons of histories there. They have histories that are from the Phoenicians, from the Ephesians, from the Babylonians, from the Arabians, from the Egyptians, from the Jews. They have all these histories, okay? And he's saying the captivity lasted for 70 years, and then in the 2nd year of Darius Hypates, who had become king of the Persians, Assyrians, and the Egyptians, which would align with Daniel. Remember, praying at the end, and then Darius comes and takes over. And he says, whose reign, as I have said above, Haggai and Zechariah, and the angel of the 12 prophesied. That's Haggai, Zechariah, and the angel of the 12 is Malachi, okay? And it was the high priest Joshua, the son of Josedek, and in the 2nd year of the reign of Darius, who Herodotus says destroyed the power of the Magi. Zerubbabel, the son of Salathiel, was dispatched to raise and adorn the temple of Jerusalem. The times of the Persians accordingly summed up was thus: Cyrus reigned 33 years, and he's going to go through and from secular history, and he's going to count everything from Cyrus to Cleopatra. Okay, Cleopatra reigned 22 years, and after her was the reign of the Cappadocians for 18 days. And I went through and added all this up. It still doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense with Daniel's 69th and 7th week. Then he says, accordingly, the period embraced by the Macedonian kings is in all 312 years and 18 days. He counts this crap to the day, okay? Therefore, those who prophesied in the time of Darius in the 2nd year of his reign, Haggai, Zechariah, and the angel of the 12, who prophesied about the 1st year of the 48th Olympiad, are demonstrated to be older than Pythagoras, who is said to live in the 62nd Olympiad, and then Thales, the oldest of the wise men of the Greeks, who lived in the 50th Olympiad. Those wise men are classed with Thales and are contemporaneous, and Andron said of Tripos, for Heraclitus being posterior to Pythagoras, mentions in his book, blah, blah, blah. And he's going to use all this old history to show how he coordinates it and all this stuff. And then he is going to talk about the building of the temple. He's going to talk about Orpheus and these guys. I think they're all influenced by the Danites personally. And then he is going to go and go and go. Let's see. And then he's going to say, then within the same period, John prophesied till the baptism of salvation. And after the birth of Christ, Anna and Simeon, for Zacharias, John's father, is said to be in the Gospels to have prophesied before his son. Let us draw up the chronology of the Greeks from Moses, okay? And these are his chronologies. He's going to have chronologies from Moses and all this stuff. And he is off by what you would get out of a King James Bible, which is based on the Masoretic text, by about 1,300 years. It's all over the place, okay? The point is his chronology is horrible. He doesn't do his math, okay? I've done his math, and I'm just like, you're off by dozens of years just trying to make it line up with Christ in the first place, because he's just not calculating right, okay? But then he is allegorizing and spreading, and he's not being logically consistent with Daniel's 70th week. He's putting it around the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem and in Christ's ministry at the same time, like there's a dual fulfillment of that 70th week, okay? I can't reconcile that. The only thing I can reconcile is based on, and I can give you all my data for how I got there, based on a 360-day year, based on the dates that are used to coordinate when Herod died, which new data has come up. Astrological data says there was another, apparently like an eclipse that they didn't know about, that apparently was in 1 or 2 BC rather than 4 BC, which would put the 4 BC date of Jesus being 2 years old, and then Herod dies, and then Jesus can come back, and it all makes sense. And then you have Jesus being around 34 years old, 33, 34 years old, when John baptizes him, which is going to be about a year into John's ministry, which starts in 29. So Jesus starts to minister in around 30, and he dies in 33. Okay, so he's probably baptized in the fall, I think, of 30, and he dies in the spring of 33 or something like that. His ministry is 2.5 years, which accords with the 3 Passovers in John with a little time before and after. There's your 2.5 years. And then John's ministry is the third year to make it 3.5 years. So they do have a 3.5 year ministry, and I wouldn't be totally opposed to saying, Well, that's the first half of the week, but you have to double the first half of the week because you're going to have it in the book of Revelation. Whether or not you say, okay, it was fulfilled in the first coming of Christ, you still have to deal with these 3.5 year periods in the book of Revelation, which is really, really obvious, okay? I mean, they're in chapter 11, chapter 11, chapter 12, chapter 13, all mark a 3.5 year period. You can't, so when are these? And if you see the normal interpretation of it, it's clear the 2 witnesses are going to prophesy for the first half, the Antichrist is going to reign for the second half. That's what everyone in the early church calculated as, because that's how you interpret Daniel, and that's how you interpret the book of Revelation, and it's consistent, okay? So anyways, that's going to be Irenaeus, that's going to be Clement. So Clement, like I said, 20, 30 years after Irenaeus. After him is going to come Origen, and I read Origen and against Celsus. He mentions and quotes Daniel, but he doesn't give any exposition on it. So he doesn't explain what he believes on it. He just says, we just know this about the end times, and then he just doesn't say anything about it, okay? But Origen was known for saying one thing publicly and another thing privately. He's a snake in the grass. He very clearly wrote in his First Principles, which I have a copy of, that all the enemies of God will eventually be reconciled in the end. But when he was called out by the Bishop of Alexandria for teaching that Satan could be saved in the end, he flatly denied it. But he waited till that bishop was dead to deny it, because he knew that bishop could go get writings probably from the academy in Alexandria to prove it. Okay, so he waited till that bishop was dead to deny he ever said that. Okay, but it's in his First Principles. He eventually publishes it. Okay. So, and he waits till it's safe to publish, where he's got a lot of influence, and then he publishes it. Origen was a snake. Origen was a full-blown Gnostic heretic. I don't know why nobody called him out in his crap, okay? He castrated himself. That's how big of a Gnostic he was. That's how demonized he was. He cut his nads off, okay? So anyways, that's this is going to be early in the 2nd century. Then you're going to have Tertullian, okay? And Tertullian is going to write a lot of stuff, not specific eschatological treatment, but Tertullian is going to write. Tertullian also, he is influenced by Plato. There's evidence that he's influenced by Clement, but he never cites Clement. He's also going to reference different people by ulterior names. He's just different. He's a different guy. He is his own animal. He is a very smart guy. He was formerly a lawyer. And then he joins the church. He ends up joining the Montanists. He's very different. But he says, Daniel says both the holy city and the holy place are exterminated together with the coming leader, and that at the pinnacle is destroyed to ruin. And so the times of the coming Christ, the leader must be inquired to, which we shall trace in Daniel. And after computing them, shall prove him to come, even on the grounds of the times prescribed and the competent signs of operation of his. Okay, so you're looking at, he's probably, I think he dies around 230 AD. So I'm going to give him a ballpark of this is around the same time as Clement, okay? Maybe he's influenced by Clement, maybe this is totally independent, okay? But remember, there are rumors circulating around that Nero committed the abomination of desolation and that he's going to rise from the dead. We have independent sources from the secular world and the church saying this, okay? So he says, which matters we will prove again on the ground of the consequences which have ever been announced to follow his advent, in order that we may believe all that has been fulfilled as foreseen. So he's going to prove out that Daniel was Christ was fulfilling Daniel. Okay. In such wise, therefore, did Daniel predict concerning him, as to both show when and in what time he was to set the nations free, and how after the passion of Christ that the city had to be exterminated. For he says thus, in the first year of Darius, he's going to quote Daniel, and then he's going to say, while I was speaking. And then he says, Daniel, I came to imbue thee with his understanding, ponder thy word. Let's see. And thou shalt know thoroughly and understand that from the going forth and the restoring and the rebuilding of Jerusalem unto Christ the leader. He is reading apparently a Latin version of the Septuagint. He writes in Latin. He says the leader, hebdomads. So this is what he's going to call the 70 weeks. 7.5, and this is 62.5. So I don't know why he divides it this way, but he divides it 7.5 and then 62.5. Okay, so I don't know why he does this, but this is what he does. And he shall convert and be built into height and entrenchment, and the time shall be renewed. And after the 62 hebdomads shall the anointing be exterminated, and shall not be, and the city and the holy place shall be exterminate together with the leader, who is making his advent, and they shall be cut short as in a deluge until the end of the war. So the end of the war will be the flood, okay? Which shall be cut short to ruin, and he shall confirm a testament of many in one hebdomad, and in half of the other hebdomad shall he take away my sacrifice and libation, and in the holy place the execration of devastation. That's his way of saying abomination of desolation. Until the end of the time, consummation shall be given with regard to this devastation, okay? These are their translations. These are Greek and Latin of the Septuagint, okay? He says, observe we therefore the limit, how in truth he predicts that there is to be 70 hebdomads, within which if they receive them, it shall be built into a height and entrenchment, and the time shall be renewed. But God, foreseeing what was to be, that they will not merely not receive him, but will both persecute and deliver him to death, both recapitulated, and said that in the 60 and 2.5 hebdomad he is born, and in the holy of holy ones he is anointed in the 7 hebdomads. Okay, so this is how jacked up Tertullian is. Tertullian is saying that this is again 62.5 7-year periods. He's born, and then he doesn't realize 7 hebdomads is 49 years later. He's saying he's saying Jesus is 49 years old. He was influenced by Irenaeus, who writes when Jesus, when they say to Jesus, "You are not yet 50 years old," Irenaeus supposes that because they said that, he must be in his late 40s. Okay, so when they say you're not yet 50 years old, obviously if he's less than 40, they wouldn't say that. They would say you're not yet 40 years old. They don't know how old he is. Okay, they don't know how old he is. What if he's in his? I mean, I have him at around age 37 when he says that. So if he's age 37, how do you know if he's 40 or not? You don't. He's a homeless guy walking around. He's probably pretty rough. Okay. So he says, whereby namely the 7.5 sebdomads have been completed. So what they're going to claim is that the 49.5 years, so that's Jesus' life, and then the city, he's going to claim this 50 years is going to take you to the destruction of Jerusalem. Okay? For he says thus, that the city and the holy place to be exterminated together with the leader who is to come, and they shall be cut short as the deluge, and shall destroy the pinnacle to ruin. Where therefore we show that Christ came within the 62.5 hebdomads. Okay, so he's saying 62.5 7-year periods. Do the math on that from Darius's command. And we shall count, moreover, from the first year of Darius, as is the particular time shown to Daniel in a particular vision. And he says, understand and conjecture that the completion of thy world I will make these answers. So notice he's not. This is the command from Darius, he's saying. Okay, well, Darius is the one who commanded Ezra, I think, to go out. He says, so let us see therefore the years that are filled up in the advent of Christ. And I could be wrong. Maybe I thought it was Artaxerxes that commanded Nehemiah to go fulfill the wall. Maybe it was Darius. I'm pretty sure Darius commands Ezra to go out and finish the temple. Okay, and that's something different. But you see how they're mixing up where we start from. Him and Clement have two different theories. And then they have two different theories about how the 62 and 7 weeks are divided up. And then they both somehow land at the end with the destruction of Jerusalem, but it doesn't make sense any way they spin it. And so then he's going to go count from Darius to Artaxerxes, all the way down to Soter to Cleopatra again. And again, you can count all these years. I counted them all up. Doesn't make any sense. And yet again, Cleopatra jointly reigned jointly with Augustus after Cleopatra, Augustus, and the other for all these years in the empire were 56 years. And then he said, moreover, how in the 41st year of the empire of Augustus, when he has become reigning after 2 years of Cleopatra, Christ is born. And the same time Augustus survived after Christ is born is 15 years. And in the remaining times of the years to the birth of Christ will bring us to the 40th year, the remaining time of Augustus to the birth of Christ will bring us to the 41st year, which is the 20th and the 8th of whatever. And then he says, so they're fulfilled in the birth of Christ. Okay, so he's taken it up to the birth of Christ, where Clement takes it up to Christ's ministry. Exact same data, unless he's starting at Darius and the other one's actually starting at a different, starting point. I don't know. But they're not accurate. They're not consistent. And then he's going to say, was manifest and the Holy One was anointed, that is Christ, and sealed with a vision of the prophet, and the sins are remitted. Through the faith in the name of Christ are washed away for all who believe on him. But what does he mean by the saying, vision and prophecy are sealed, that all the prophets ever announced him was to come and suffer? Therefore, since the prophecy was fulfilled through his advent, for all reason he said vision and prophecy were sealed, inasmuch as that he is a signet for all prophets, fulfilling all things from the days bygone had been announced of him. For after the advent of Christ, his passion there is no longer vision or prophet to announce him to come. Okay, so he's going to say he is stopping prophecy about the coming of Christ, not sealing up prophecy. I say that's wrong because you have prophets after that, number one. Number two, John's apocalypse is a prophecy about his second coming. And number three, you have witness in Zechariah about in the second coming when Christ is reigning from Jerusalem, that it's going to be a legal prophecy. And you're also going to have that in, I think in Zechariah. That is in Zechariah. And then you're going to have it in Daniel. And then you're going to have Paul in 1 Corinthians that say prophecy is going to cease when we see him face to face. Okay, so that's very clear that prophecy continues till then. But again, these guys are going to wedge stuff in, like prophecies about his first coming to make their crap make sense. And I just don't buy that, okay? Now here's the thing. This is my problem with how Seventh-day Adventists do this, okay? Now this is simple math. This is simple proofs that you guys have to come up with to stand on your theory. I don't entirely have a problem, because this is hard to calculate, right? Is it a 360-day year or a 365-day year? When exactly did it start? I'm saying it starts with the decree from Artaxerxes to Nehemiah to finish the wall. That's what I'm saying, okay? And like I said, on the 360-day year, I get to 31. On the 365-day year, I get to 38. 38 doesn't make sense because Christ is long gone by then. 31 does make sense because it would be a year and a half before he goes, and it just says after 69 weeks, so that would work, okay? That's what I got. Now, here's the burden of proof that is on Seventh-day Adventists, okay? Never mind the stupid-ass prophecy of Ellen G. White and her predecessors that never got fulfilled, because that's just stupid, okay? Never mind the 2,300 year stuff. Forget all that. You don't need to prove any of that. What you need to prove is when that starting point of Daniel's 70th weeks were, and take the entire 70 weeks forward from there, and where does that land you? And there's nothing you can do under the sun to make that land on Stephen unless you push back the beginning of Christ's ministry to 28 AD. And all church history, every calculation you have is John's ministry starting in 29 by things that we can prove. And you can't go from these arguments of mystery and the Romans destroyed it and the calendars changed and all this stuff to make your arguments. Because if that's on the basis that you make your arguments, then you can't say it's 28 AD because you don't know. The best you can say is, I don't know. Okay? So you can't affirmatively say it's 28 AD, but they wrecked the calendars. Okay? The best you can say is we can't prove anything because they wrecked the calendars. Okay? I'm saying, assuming they didn't wreck the calendars, let's just assume people weren't trying to deliberately wreck the calendars. You can still miscalculate things. And if they calculate, I think it was like 5th or 6th century, based on this eclipse when Herod died, that in 4 BC, that's how they get Jesus being born in 6 BC or whatever, or that's how they get the year 0, and it looks like the year 0 was calculated on what you believe, which was that Jesus was 29, meaning about 30, when he came to John, so therefore it was 29. They just go back 29 years from that to 0. That's how they originally calculated it. But it doesn't make sense. That's literally how they did it. Okay, I've read, I forget who it was like a bishop in like the 4th or the 5th or 6th century who did it. That's how they got the year 0 for the year of our Lord. Okay, again, this is after all of Roman is Catholic. Okay, so that's why they have the justification to build a calendar on Jesus, right? You need a Catholic empire to do that. And they just use that argument, but none of the other data lines up. By then, they're all amillennial. I'm just showing you, these are principal theologians in the Catholic Church. I mean, Clement is principal in the East, and Tertullian is principal in the West. And what I mean by principal, I mean they're foundational in their belief systems, okay? And I'm showing you how much they disagree, how much they calculate differently, and just how bad their math is, okay? Read this stuff for yourself. This is Tertullian. Tertullian's of the times of Christ and the Passion of Jerusalem destruction. It's going to be, let's see, page 329. I think it's going to be in his apologetic. Okay, so this is going to be as an apologetic, and this is going to be where some of the earliest supersessionist arguments come from. Also, you're going to find them in him, and then you're going to find them in Lactantius, who is going to be the mentor of Constantine's son. I forget his name, but he kills that son. Okay, so these are going to be some of your earliest supersessionist arguments. That's why he's arguing this for the Jews, that it was all fully fulfilled. Okay, so I want you to see this, because with Clement, you have him trying to get rid of a literal millennium already, and literal future fulfillments. With him, you're trying to get supersessionism out of this. Again, this is an answer to the Jews. He's trying to say, the Jews, God's done with you. There's no future for you, okay? They're starting with that premise, and then they're calculating Daniel's 70 weeks from there. Clement is starting with the premise of he's already getting into Plato. He's flat out saying Plato and the Stoics were somewhat inspired, okay? He's saying that. He is promoting Gnosticism, and Origen is going to crystallize all his stuff to come up with amillennial. And so you have two different groups of people for two different reasons. One is anti-Semitic and supersessionist. The other is amillennial, okay? And for two distinct reasons, they're going to come up with these jacked up interpretations of Daniel because it's in their way, okay? And you see how they don't agree with each other. And this is how I discern stuff when I go through theology, okay? When I find multiple guys who agree with each other and they have no reason to lie, that's two witnesses. When I have multiple guys who are saying the same wrong thing, but they have different reasons and different ways of getting there, and for two different motives, that sounds like BS to me, okay? That's the difference. But the history is going to go down because the reformers are going to read this stuff and they're going to be like, there you go, Daniel's 70th week is fulfilled. And the reformers were horrible about prophecy, okay? They were, that's why the Seventh-day Adventists came around, because the reformers were horrible about reconciling prophecy. They didn't even try. They were supposedly so against allegorizing, but they would allegorize any prophecies if it would make them not have to deal with the things that they didn't want to deal with, okay? The reformers were some of the most devious people out there. They're just horrible scholars. They're just pompous, and they're constantly using rhetoric. They're constantly reaching the Greek philosophers because they're basically neo-orthodox. They're not really Reformed Catholics. They're not really Biblicists. They're not really sola scriptura. They're not restorationists. They're really neo-orthodox. That's really what they are. They're just basically taking an Augustinian version of mixed Greek philosophy and Christian to make Gnosticism, and instead of the Clementine, which is based on Plato. Okay, they're both based on Plato. They're all based on Plato. Tertullian's using Plato. Cyprian's using Tertullian, but he's just making legalistic stuff up. Clement and Origen are using Plato hardcore, and Augustine's using Plato. Okay, but they're all like. The reformers just don't want a pope. That's their only thing. That's their only real thing. They don't want a pope, and they're trying to get rid of baptismal regeneration and the proofs of the authority for the quote-unquote one apostolic church. So they'll agree with everyone the Catholic Church has historically called a heretic, but they're trying to agree with them on the basis of stuff that was pre-pope. And so what they do is they go and justify all this really bad theology in order to say, yes, we agree with all the councils, yes, we agree with Catholicism, but the Pope is not the authority of what's Catholic, and neither is the one true church, the Roman Church. That's what they're trying to get rid of, and they're trying to go back to Constantine's Christendumb, which is what they're trying to do at the present day, okay? So again, this is Tertullian. This is early in the 2nd century. So there's Tertullian, there's Clement, there's Barnabas, there's the Didache, and there is Irenaeus that we've dealt with, okay? And then there's Papias a little bit, but mostly Papias we have what other people are saying about him, okay? So if you go forward from him, let's see, this is Tertullian again. This is Origen. Like I said, Origen is going to treat Daniel. We can get to Daniel. Let's see here. So Origen is going to say even the place of his birth that's predicted by the prophet Micah. He's talking about Jesus, and then he's saying the weeks of years also which the prophet Daniel had predicted extending to the leadership of Christ have been fulfilled. He's not going to say anything beside that. So we're assuming that he's standing under what Clement said, that Clement was his teacher. He never says anything distinct from Clement, okay? He actually says very little. He says, according to Daniel, the 70 weeks were fulfilled until the coming of Christ the ruler. And he came, according to Job, had subdued a great fish. Had subdued the great fish. I think he's talking about Jonah. And has given power to his true disciples to tread on serpents and scorpions, the power of the enemy, without sustaining injury to them. We notice the universal advent of the apostles sent by Jesus Christ. He makes a bunch of arguments about Bel and the dragon being legit from the book of Daniel, because remember, he does a lot of work on the Septuagint and on the Apocrypha and stuff like that. Then he says, anyone, moreover, who likes may find the prophecy of Daniel respecting the Antichrist. So he is saying that the Antichrist is in Daniel. You got to deal with that, okay? This is hundreds of years after the apostles. Even these guys who are anti-millennium are saying that Daniel prophesied the Antichrist, okay? He's also going to say that the glory of the sun, the moon, and the other glory of the stars, star differs from one another in glory. This is in 1 Corinthians 15, is Daniel's prophecy about the righteous being like stars in the heavens. So this is something I use in my book because that is at the midpoint of Daniel's 70th week. That's how I land on Mid-Trib, okay? Again, this is... Just because I disagree with these guys' overall theology doesn't mean individual proofs are all wrong, okay? Some of the stuff these guys say, I found the exact same thing. He's also going to, Origen's also going to say how God created Adam and Eve he said he was going to create them in his image and likeness, but when he creates them, he just creates them in his image. And then he creates them, him, male, and them, male and female, because just like God, he's a him and then them, okay? That's his image, okay? So then remember, he's against Celsus, and Celsus is anti-Christian, so he's going to say this, but since Celsus rejects the statements concerning Antichrist, it is termed having neither what is said about him in the book of Daniel, nor in the writings of Paul. So he's telling you, Paul's getting his stuff from Daniel, nor what the Savior of the Gospels has predicted about his coming. We must also make a few remarks on this subject, because as faces do not resemble faces, so neither do men's hearts resemble each other, okay? So here's the thing. Origen is not going to be consistent, and here's why. He is writing, this is a public defense of Christianity against Celsus, and this is going to be distinct from his teaching on some things. And some of the stuff he's going to show, because he's going to show when he says when Adam and Eve got coats of skins, he's saying that's when they got their human bodies. Okay, but other things he's going to just argue standard, this is what the church believes, against Celsus, because this is for the Christians against an anti-Christian pagan, okay? And he doesn't know this stuff, and so he's not going to treat it. He's just going to cite what other people are saying about it, and he's just going to say like the writings of Paul come from Daniel. They're about the Antichrist, okay? But again, this is around probably this is the last thing he writes before he dies, so probably around 240 AD, okay? Let's see, term the son of the wicked demon, of Satan, of the devil. In the next place, since evil is especially characterized by its diffusion, it attains its greatest height when it simulates the appearance of the good. And for that reason, signs and marvels and lying miracles are found to accompany evil through the cooperation of the father of the devil. For surpassing help with those demons, give to the jugglers who deceive men, for the basis is the aid of which the devil deceives the human race. Paul indeed speaks of him who is called Antichrist, describing, though with a certain reserve, both the manner and the time and cause of his coming to the human race. And notice where the language and the subject is the most beginning and undeserving of being treated with even the slightest degree of ridicule, okay? So here's the thing. He is going to talk about the Antichrist, and the amillennialists are not against belief in an Antichrist. They're not against an end time scenario. What they're just saying is there's not a literal millennium after that, okay? That's how he sees it. Because Origen is going to believe that in the end, when God finally dissolves the creation, everybody's going to be reconciled to him. And he's going to say this in his first principles very clearly, okay? So he's just going to quote standard Christian stuff on the Antichrist. Look, the prophecy also regarding the Antichrist is stated in the book of Daniel and is fitted to make an intelligent and candid reader admire the words of the truly divine and prophetic. And in them are mentioned the things related to the coming kingdom, beginning with the times of Daniel and continuing to the destruction of the world, okay? This is Origen. There's nobody in the church whatsoever that doesn't think that Daniel's prophecies aren't about the end of the world. There's zero people in the entire church, okay? There's people who are amillennial. There's people who are anti-Semitic. There are people who are trying to prove that these prophecies are fulfilled and that we're in this age because they know how these prophecies lead into a millennium. But there's nobody who is not saying that Daniel is not prophesying about the end of the world, okay? He says, observe, however, whether the prophecy regarding Antichrist be not as followed in the latter time of their kingdom, when their sins are come to the full, and the great arise a king, bold in countenance and understanding riddles. This sounds a lot more like our Bibles now. And his power shall be great, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and prosper in practice, and shall destroy men and the holy people. Now remember, Origen wrote the Hexapla. The hexapla is basically the standard by which we have the Septuagint now. We also know that he was working with Hebrew scholars, okay? So that's why this sounds so much better than what Clement and Tertullian have, okay? That's why it sounds so much more like our modern Bibles. And the yoke of his chain shall prosper. There is craft in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and craft shall destroy many. And he shall stand up for the destruction of many, and shall crush them as eggs in his hands. What is stated by Paul and the words quoted from him are when he says he sits in the temple of God, showing that he is God. So he's very clearly saying what Paul's writing in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians is what Daniel's writing about the Antichrist. And in that context, this is Daniel 11 right here. Okay, he's quoting Daniel 11 and saying that's what Paul's talking about in in 2nd Thessalonians. Okay, showing himself as God is in Daniel referred to in the following fashion: and on the temple shall be the abominations of desolation, and in the time of an end shall he put an end to the desolation. I believe that's Daniel 8. Okay, correct me if I'm wrong. 45:18. That is Daniel 9. I'm sorry, that's Daniel 9:27. So this is right out of Daniel's 70th week, and there's Origen right here. Again, he's being mild in against Celsus because he knows this is going out public. This is what makes him really famous, okay? In his first principles, he lays out his universalism, and he lays out his belief that the end of the world is really everybody's going to be reconciled in the end. He's not laying that out here, okay? Because he knows he'll be attacked as a heretic if he does this. He is laying out standard Christian eschatology here, and listen to what he's saying. The temple shall be the abomination of desolation, and in the time of the end shall put the desolation. So many out of a greater number of passages have I thought it right to adduce, but that the hearer may understand some slight degree meaning of the Holy Scripture when it gives us information concerning the devil and Antichrist, and being satisfied with what we have quoted for this purpose, let us look at another charges against Celsus. So he moves on to another topic, okay? This is Origen. This is the founder of amillennialism, and even he, because he knows he doesn't have his amillennialism worked out, okay? What he does is he's asserting amillennialism privately, and his disciples are going to start to pop it out because he's saying he doesn't believe in a resurrection of the dead, and that's going to come after him. So this is Origen, okay? And after Origen is toast, Hippolytus actually writes before Origen dies. Hippolytus is writing this before. It's going to be around 215. What's going to happen is Hippolytus is going to be, he writes this whole story about Pope Callistus and how he's really this fraudulent bankster who is this, he's like a Judas, he's a straight up scoundrel, and he took over the Roman Church by becoming the under manager to the bishop and then just claiming himself as the bishop. And so these guys elect Hippolytus to be the true bishop, okay? And so Hippolytus writes a ton of stuff. He writes basically an encyclopedia against heretics. He writes the apostolic teaching, which is the standard Catholic practice of baptism and electing bishops and all this stuff. And he's doing all this to basically say, we have a competitive church now. This is what the true church believes. And this is Hippolytus. This is the disciple of Irenaeus, who's the disciple of Polycarp, who's the disciple of John, okay? And this is after this, again, this supposedly, he's a modalist, and he's a scammer, and he gets the Pope's seat somehow, but there's no popes yet. It's just the bishop's seat, okay? And he is going to write about the hexameron, okay? This is the 6 days. He's getting this from Irenaeus. He is going to write a complete treatise on Daniel, including the apocryphal stuff, okay? And in that, and we're going to get into that in a minute, and he's also going to write a treatise on Christ and Antichrist, okay? And we're going to get into that, because this is identical with my teaching, with one exception, okay? The two witnesses. He thinks they're Enoch and Elijah because Enoch never died. He is misquoting that Hebrews passage to say, it is appointed to men to taste death once. But if we look at Daniel, interpretive vision of Daniel, he's going to talk about the lioness rising from the sea, the head with the golden wings, and he's going to interpret all this as the Babylonians, the Persians, the Medes and the Babylonians, Alexander of Macedon, and he's going to bring it down to the iron and clay mixed together, and he's going to say that there's by toes of feet mystically 10 kings are rising out of that kingdom. He's talking about Rome, okay? Where the other people are inferring that Daniel's 70th week is out in the future, he's going to flat out say it, okay? He says, in Daniel I consider the beast which things were the 10 horns that come behind the little horn, and by which there's none other meant that the Antichrist is to rise and set up the kingdom of Judah, in saying the three horns were plucked up by the roots. By this one he indicates that three kings, the Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia, whom this one will slay out of the array of war, and when he has conquered all, he will prove himself terrible and savage tyrant, and will cause tribulation and persecution of the saints, exalting himself against them. And after him it remains that the stone from which heaven smote the image and shivered it, and subverted all the kingdoms, and gave the kingdoms to the saints of the Most High. This will become a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Okay, so he's saying this is the last days. The Antichrist is going to capture Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia. Obviously, you can say that, like, well, the king of Babylon did that. That's fine, okay, but Rome never captured Ethiopia, and neither did Greece. So you're going to have a real problem there. And then he's going to say, and these things then are destined to come to pass, and the toes of the image turn out to be democracies. This is interesting. They turn out to be democracies, and the whole world's democracies right now, okay? And the 10 horns, look at the guys who are quoting this in the 1800s. This is 1885. A very pregnant testimony in our own time, because the whole world is getting overthrown and being turned into democracies, okay? These are the reformers who are amillennial, who are preterists, and they're like, holy crap, this is sounding like it's our times. And it's like, yes, it's your times, stupid. Like, why do you think the Jews are going back and colonizing Israel now, okay? And he says he's going to flat out say that the Antichrist rebuilds Judea, okay? They're going to be democracies. The 10 horns of the beast are distributed among 10 kings. Let us look at what is before us more carefully and scan it, as it were, with an open eye. The golden head of the image is identical with the lioness by which the Babylonians are represented, the golden shoulders and the arms of silver, and the same with the bear by which the Persians and Medes are met. The belly of thighs and brass are the leopard by which the Greeks are ruled from Alexander. Okay, so for those of you guys who have been following my channel, why I don't like Joel Richardson, he has read this stuff, and he flat out lies to you and says, oh, these are talking about the Persians. I kid you not. He goes, these are the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and Islam. He skips Rome altogether. He says that the statues and the animals are not meant to line up, and he's got this material. He's read it, and he'll get up there because he knows his audience is dumb, and he mostly preaches to charismatics and stuff, and he tells them a totally different theory, which is his Islamic Antichrist theory. It's bullcrap, okay? It's 10 democracies. Then he says, the golden shoulders and the arms of the silver are the same with the bear by which the Persians and the Medes are met, and the belly of thighs and brass are the leopard by which the Greeks ruled from Alexander onwards, the legs of iron are the dreadful and terrible beast by which the Romans are to hold the empire now are meant. The toes of clay and iron are the 10 horns which are to be. Okay, see, he says the exact same thing that Irenaeus says, because he was taught by Irenaeus. He says the one other little horn springing up from their midst is the Antichrist, the stone that smites the image and breaks it into pieces that filled the whole earth. Okay, the little horn is the Antichrist. This is like he breaks away with that other bishop in 213 AD, which means this is somewhere between 213. He dies in a prison camp in 235. So you're looking at between 100 and 120 years from John the Apostle, from a guy who is 2 people removed from John the Apostle. Okay. And he says, he filled the whole earth as Christ from who comes from heaven and earth and brings judgment on the whole world. But that we may not leave our subject at this point undemonstrated, we are obliged to discuss the matter of times, from which a man should not speak hastily, because they are a light to him. For as the time are noted from the foundation of the world and reckoned from Adam, they set clearly before us the matter which our inquiry deals. For the first appearance of our Lord in flesh took place at Bethlehem under Augustus in the year 5500. Remember, they're running off the Septuagint, so they got their time all messed up. And he suffered in the 133rd year, in the 6,000th year, must needs be accomplished. And that's why you're going to have in the 5th century, you're going to have Ephraim the Syrian. And Ephraim the Syrian, in his day, Rome is going to be fighting with Parthia, and Christians are going to be persecuted. Okay? He thinks that that's the end times. And the reason is because they think they're close to the 6,000th year. Okay? So they think they're going into the end times. They don't know exactly how long it's going to last, but that's why you have the Montanists and Ephraim the Syrian and guys like this thinking it's the end time, because they're running off the Septuagint, and they think they're around the 5,500 to 6,000 year mark now, okay? And he said, and he suffered in the 33rd year, and 6,000 years must be accomplished. There's 3 witnesses. Now, I know he's taught by Irenaeus, 3 witnesses of a 6,000 year history with a 1,000 year millennium. I won't waste 2 seconds arguing with an amillennialist, because if our millennials, Orthodox, Catholic, Protestants, I don't care who you guys are, you guys go read the second and third century. You are not going to find amillennialism from anybody except students of Origen. And they don't believe in a resurrection of the dead. So screw those guys. They're Hindus. So I don't care what they think, okay? In order that the Sabbath may come, the holy day in which God rested from all his works. So that's the millennial Sabbath, okay? For the Sabbath is the type of the emblem of the future kingdom of the saints when they shall reign with Christ, and he comes from heaven, as John says in the Apocalypse, for the day of the Lord is as 1,000 years. See, they all interpret a day with the Lord as 1,000 years as being the millennium. They understand Peter saying the millennium and John saying the millennium. They all understand this. I got this independently of them. But then I went back and go, look at almost everything I've ever taught. I mean, almost everything I've ever taught. The craziest ideas I thought I've had, I find them taught by somebody else. I find the idea that Jesus put on sinful flesh taught in a guy named Alexander that Tertullian argues against. And his arguments are crap. They're horrible. And he has two different arguments because he doesn't have a reason. Okay? I find the idea that the Holy Spirit is Sophia and is basically the wife of God and the mother of Jesus and us all. It's the true mother of us all. There's Syrian Christians who believe that, as well as two branches of Gnosticism that believe that, and the people who argue against that say Sophia is Jesus. Okay, so when your argument, what I do when I look for stuff, and it's novel because I don't want to be a heretic, I want to see if anyone else has taught that, and if the so-called Catholics or the so-called Orthodox taught against that, I want to know what their arguments are, and if their arguments are crap. And I find people, these people are calling the Novatianists heretics because they're not pardoning people who deny Christ and saying, yes, you're definitely saved. Okay? That's what the Catholics are doing within 25 years of this. Okay? And then they call the Novatianists heretics for saying, no, wait. Hebrews 6 says you can't fall away and be brought back to repentance. So they're more like Wesleyans, basically. And the Catholics are saying, no, we can pardon any sin because we're the Catholic Church. We can do whatever we want, basically. And, so I don't trust these guys. They lie. In the 5th century, they write the apostolic constitutions in the first person as if it's Peter talking and the apostles, and they're trying to pawn this off all over the Roman Empire as if the apostles wrote this and handed it down to us, to take stuff that you can tell they got from the Didache and from Hippolytus' apostolic tradition and a few other documents and put it together, and then they write it in a perfect form as if, yep, we just had this, we've had this since the apostles. These guys are liars. They're liars. They're collaborating with Rome. You got guys who are taking over bishop seats, and they're like 2-year-old Christians or 1-year-old Christians or not even baptized yet, because these are prominent positions where you can have a government position on the side and the bishop's position, and you're rich, and you can still have a wife and kids and do whatever you want. And they haven't made priests celibate yet. Okay, so these guys are scammers. Okay, just like all the cult leaders. Anyways. He says, since then in 6 days God made all things, and it follows in 6,000 years they must be fulfilled. And they are not fulfilled, as John says, 5 are fallen, one is, that is the 6th, and the other is not yet come. So he's interpreting John saying 5 are fallen, one is, and the other is not yet come, as 5,000 years have passed, one is, and the other is not yet come. Now, John's talking about 5 mountains and 5 kings and mountains here. He's talking about empires. He's not talking about millenniums. But these guys think, because of the Septuagint, that they're in the 6th millennium right now. Okay? They're not. They're in the beginning of the 5th. Okay? They're off by 1,300 years. Then it says, in mentioning the other, moreover, he specifies the 7th, which is there as rest, but someone may be ready to say, how will you prove to me that the Savior was born in the year 5500? Easily, and he's going to work that out from Moses. And again, he is he's pulling stuff together based on Septuagint. It's based on bad translation, so I'm not going to get into all these details. But let's see. Oh, and then here's your 2,300 days, okay? And you were right on this. For Antiochus arose, surnamed Epiphanes, who was the line of Alexander, and after he had reigned in Syria, he had brought under him all of Egypt, and went to Jerusalem, and entered the sanctuary, and seized the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the golden candlestick, and the table, and the altar, and made a great slaughter in the land. As it is written, the sanctuary shall be trodden underfoot, evening unto morning, 1,300 days. Okay? 2,300 days. For it happened that the sanctuary remained desolate during that period, 3 years and a half. that 1,300 days might be fulfilled until Judas Maccabeus arose after the death of his father Matthias and withstood him and destroyed the encampment of Antiochus and delivered the city and recovered the sanctuary in strict accordance with the law. So notice he's saying that was fulfilled in past history. And then he says, since then the angel Gabriel also recounts things to the prophet as they have been understood by us, as they have also taken place, and as they have all clearly described in the book of Maccabees. Let us see further what he says on the other weeks. For when he has read in the book of Jeremiah the prophet that is written, the sanctuary should be desolate 70 years, he made a confession with fastings and supplications and prayed that people might return sooner from their captivity to the city of Jerusalem. Thus he speaks in this account, and he's just quoting Daniel here, and then he says, having therefore mentioned 70 weeks, and having divided them into two parts, in order that what is spoken to him by the prophet might be better understood, he proceeds thus, unto Christ the Prince shall be 7 weeks, which is 49 years. It shall be 21st year that Daniel saw these things in Babylon. Hence, the 49 years added to the 21 makes 70 years, of which the blessed Jeremiah spoke, the sanctuary shall be desolate 70 years from the captivity that befell under Nebuchadnezzar. And after these things the people will return, and the sacrifice and offering will be presented when Christ is their prince. Okay? Now, he's basically saying that it was the 21st year when Daniel saw these things in Babylon, hence 49 years added to the 21 make up the 70 years. I don't know how that makes sense. Now, of what does Christ speak but of Jesus, of the son of Josedek, the law of 70 years, now will raise up a faithful priest and do all that is according to my heart. In order then to show the time when he is to come, whom the blessed Daniel desired to see, he says, after 7 weeks there are another 62 weeks, which time embraces the 434 years. After the return of the people from Babylon under the leadership of, that's Joshua and Ezra and Zerubbabel of the tribe of David, there were 343 years until the coming of Christ, in order that the priest of priests might be manifest to the world. Somebody else can double do my math. My brain's tired right now, okay? And then he says, in order that the priest of priests might be manifested as he would, and that take away the sins of the world, that might be evidently set forth, as John speaks concerning him, behold the Lamb that takes away the sin of the world. And in like manner, Gabriel says to blot out transgressions and to make a reconciliation for sins. But who has blotted out our transgressions? Paul the Apostle says, he has made our peace, both one, blotting out the handwriting of sins that was against us. That transgression, therefore, are blotted out, and the reconciliation for sins is shown by this. But who are they that have made reconciliations for sin but they who believe on his name and propitiate his countenance by good works? And that after the people of the return of the people of Babylon, there was a space of 434 years until the time of the birth of Christ. So he says 434 years till the birth of Christ may be easily understood. For since the first covenant was given to the children of Israel after a period of 434 years, I never thought of that. Paul says that. I never thought of that. The first covenant was given to Israel after a period of 434 years. Paul says that in Galatians. He says it follows that the second covenant should also be defined by the same space of time, 434 years, if you add 49 to it, and then add 7 weeks. I never thought why they broke off 434 years like that, okay? Then he says, and there's a space of time in order that it might be expected by the people, easily recognized by the faithful. In other words, from Daniel's, from this decree to Christ, he's saying there's 434 years, just like from Abraham's promise to the giving of the law, there's 434 years. I never thought of that. And then he says, and for this reason Gabriel says to anoint the most holy, and the most holy is none else but the Son of God alone, who, when he came and manifested himself, said to them, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me, and so forth. Whosoever therefore believed the heavenly priest were cleansed by the priest, and their sins were blotted out. Whosoever believed him not, and despising him as a man, had their sins sealed. And those who had not taken away, whence the angel foreseeing that not all should believe on him, he said to finish sins and seal up sins. So notice he's saying the 70 weeks is not done, because not everyone who's going to believe on him believes on him, and there's still people sinning. Okay? And so he says, for as many as continued to disbelieve in him, even to the ends, had their sins not finished, but sealed to be kept for judgment. But as many as will believe on him and is able to remit sins, have their sins blotted out. Wherefore he says, and to seal up vision and prophet. So notice he's making clear, this is the biblical meaning. He's saying, you seal up, you make an end of sins and seal up vision and prophet by when the fullness of the believers comes in, and then you put down the sinners. Okay? And so he says, for when he came, who was the fulfilling of the law and the prophets, and the law and the prophets were until John, it was necessary that the things spoken by them should be confirmed, sealed, in order that at the coming of the Lord all things loosed should be brought to light, and all things bound of old shall be loosed by him. And the Lord said of the rulers of the people, when they were indignant at the cure on the Sabbath day, you hypocrites, does not each one of you loose his ox from the stall and lead him away to watering? And ought not this woman, being the daughter of Abraham, whom Sarah has bound these 18 years, be loosed on the Sabbath day? Okay? So then he's going to say, let's see, Pharisees, he who opens and shutteth, and no man opens. He says, and I saw him the right hand that sealed with the 7 seals, who was open to loose the seals. He's getting to Revelation now, and he says, let's see, seal up the words in the vision until the time of the end. So he's saying the book that's sealed till the time of the end is the same book that Christ opens at the end. And you have the angel sitting there with the open book, and he raises his right hand, and then Daniel's angel ends with him raising his right hand and tells him to seal it up. Okay? So it's the same thing. They're glued together. Revelation and Daniel are glued together. You can't not do that. And then, so this is what he says. He says, for this reason, then the angel says to Daniel, seal up the words in the vision until the end of time. But to Christ it was not said seal, but loose the things that are bound of old, in order that by his grace we might know the will of the Father, and believe on him who was sent for the salvation of men, Jesus the Lord. When he says, therefore, they shall return, and the street shall be built, and the wall, which in reality took place for the people to return and built the city and the temple, and the wall round about. Then he says, after 62 weeks will be fulfilled, and 1 week will make a covenant with many. In the midst of the half of the week, sacrifice and oblation will be moved, and the temple will be the abomination of desolation. He says, for when the 3, 4, and 2 weeks are fulfilled and Christ has come, the gospel is preached in every place, and the times being then accomplished, there will be only 1 week, the last, in which Elias and Enoch will appear. Those are his 2 witnesses. And in the midst of the abomination of desolation will be manifested. Antichrist announcing the desolation of the world. And when he comes, the sacrifice and oblation will be moved, which are now offered. And I don't remember exactly where I read it. It's in this treatise where he says, he specifically says that week is removed into the future. Okay? So again, this is Hippolytus, and I'm going, an individual's interpretation of Daniel, I don't give a crap about how much they want to line it up with Josephus, and they want to line it up with that history of that time, because these guys were closer to that history of that time. They had Josephus, they had all that information. They're constantly citing Josephus, they're constantly citing the Maccabees, they're constantly citing a lot of historical sources and a lot deeper historical information on that stuff beyond us. And none of them are coming up with the idea they're all saying that Daniel's 70th week in the Antichrist Clement and Tertullian are saying that it is fulfilled in the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, which doesn't add up. And everyone else is saying it's in the future with the Antichrist. Okay? So there are 2 schools of thought, and what's going to happen is that when the Roman Catholics take over, these 2 schools of thought are going to come to a head, okay? So this is book 6 now. This is going to be, let's see, Gregory of Thaumaturga. I think he might be one of the ones who talks about the 1,000 years not being literal. Methodius is going to be the guy who calls out Origen for preaching against the resurrection of the dead. I think it's after he dies, but I'm not positive. So he's worth knowing. And then, let's see, Methodius, Julius Africanus, Gregory Thaumaturgus. Okay, so this is Lactantius, and Lactantius is the one who teaches Constantine's son. So this is going to be early 4th century, and this is of his On the Last Times. He is premillennial. He says, of these things are said by the prophets as to be seers, to be about to happen. When the last end shall approach the world, wickedness will increase, and all kinds of vices and frauds will become frequent. Justice will perish. Faith, peace, modesty, and truth will have no existence. Let's see. He's going to say, the sun will be overshadowed in perpetual paleness. The moon will be stained with blood, nor will it repair to lose the light taken away. The stars will fall, nor will the seasons preserve their regularity, winter and summer being confused. Then both the year and the month and the day will be shortened. The year and the month and the day will be shortened, he's saying. I think we're going to go back to a 360-day year. That's what I think is going to happen in the last days. We're literally going to go back to a 360-day year because there is ample evidence that once upon a time it was a 360-day year, and multiple things happened in the stars having to do with the shortening of days and days going backwards and stuff like that that led to the calendar we have now, okay? Anyways, it says, he declared this old age and the decline of world, and when all this will come, it will be known in the last time, which is in the hand of God, who will return to change the world. So he's saying, which God will return and change the world. But in the midst of these evils there will rise an impious king, hostile not only to mankind, but also to God. He will trample upon, torment, harass, and put to death those who have been spared by that former tyrant. So he's actually talking about the Antichrist and the false prophet as two different kings, okay? Then there will be ever-flowing tears, perpetual wailings and lamentations, and useless prayers to God. There will be no rest from fear, no sleep from respite. The day will increase disaster, the night alarm. Thus the world will be reduced almost to solitude, certainly to fewness of men. But who the impious man will persecute the just who are dedicated to God. He will give orders himself to be worshipped as God, for he will say that he is Christ, though he will be his adversary. That he may be believed, and he will receive the power of doing wonders, that fire may descend from heaven. That's what the false prophet does. The sun retire from its course, and the image which he will have set up may speak. That's the second beast, okay? And by these prodigies he will entice many to worship him and to receive a sign in their hand or forehead. That's the mark of the beast. And he will shall not worship him, will receive his sign, will die with refined tortures. Thus he will destroy nearly 2 parts, and the third will flee into desolate solitudes. I don't know where he gets that part from. But he, frantic and raging with implacable anger, will lead an army and besiege the mountain to which the righteous have fled. I don't know where he gets that from. And when they shall see themselves besieged, they will implore God with the aid of a loud voice. Oh, I know where this is. This is the Jews that flee to Basra in Jordan. This is in Micah, okay? He says, God will hear them and he will send them a deliverer. So he's talking about the 2/3 is not, it's the 2/3 of the Jews. These are prophecies in Zechariah that he's getting this from. So he is anti-Semitic. He's starting to be anti-Semitic, and he is going to say that God has disowned the Jews. So he is interpreting then these prophecies about Israel, because remember, the idea, this is the 4th century now, okay? The idea that the Roman Catholic Church is the new Israeli priesthood and is the new Israel has crept into the church. And so he's anti-Semitic, he's replacement theology, and so he is interpreting Zechariah's prophecies about 2/3 of Israel, of the Jews being destroyed in the last days, as 2/3 of the whole world. Okay, and then the mountain that they go to, that they fled to, this is in Zechariah 14, and it's also in Micah, I think chapter 2, where he talks about the breaker breaking forth and leading them to Basra, and that's talking about how Christ is going to touch down in the mountain, it's going to split in two. He's going to open up the east gate, which is sealed up now, and they're going to flee out of that, because whoever's attacking them is going to think they're cornered in Israel, because that wall is barred up, and then Christ is going to touch down, split it open, and they're going to be able to flee to Basra, and that's where Christ defends them, and that's where he gets coated in blood, okay? So you see that, and you're saying, okay, that's when he sends them to deliver, okay? Christ is spending from heaven, general judgment, and the millenarian reign. And you're asking, okay, if this redounds so much, and I've just read to you there now. There's like maybe one thing I haven't read to you. Okay, Victorinus Victorinus is now going to write the first standard amillennial piece on the end times. Okay, and Victorinus is, let's see. So Victorinus of Patau, where is Patau? Patau is in Slovenia. This is next to Croatia. So this is where Victorinus is the bishop. He is another one of Origen's students. Remember, Origen ran a school. He ran the school at Alexandria for, I think, like 10, 15 years, and then he started his own school in Caesarea. He was educating future bishops for about 30 years, okay? And this is going to be the first guy who gives the amillennial treatment to the book of Daniel, for the basically the end times, okay? So Victorinus writes a commentary on the Apocalypse of John, and this is a complete commentary on the book of Revelation. When you get to chapter 20, like I said, I think not Lactantius, but I think that Gregory of Thaumaturga, I think I read something where he is also saying that it is a figurative millennium. I can't remember honestly where I read it. There's one other guy who does it, but it's after this guy. This is the first guy who ever says there's not a literal millennium. And let's see, Divine Liturgy. This is going to be Commentary on the End of the World. From the 20th chapter, he's going to say he's just going to quote the Book of Revelation and write commentary on it. And he says, "Those years wherein Satan is bound is the first advent of Christ, even to the end of the age, and they are called 1,000 according to the mode of speaking, which is in part signified by the whole, just as the passage, the word which he commanded for 1,000 generations." Okay. Now, this is a theory. I'm just going to put this out there. Maybe they don't think it's a literal 1,000 years because they think the 1,000 years, the 6,000 years is going to be done in 500. So maybe that's what he's saying. He's saying those years wherein Satan are bound in the first advent of Christ, even to the end of the age, and they're called 1,000 according to the mode of speaking, wherein a part is signified by the whole. Because remember, according to Hippolytus, they think they're in the year they think Christ came in 5500, so they think they're like 300 years away from this, and so they're saying the millennium is not a literal millennium because they think it's closer than it is. Okay, these people, I mean, and these are the students of Origen who don't believe in a resurrection where you're going to have people eating and drinking and procreating. They don't believe in that, but they still are taking this 1,000 years under the idea, well, we only have like 300 years left until this happens, so that 1,000 years must be representing a part signified by the whole. Okay, so notice they're not saying it's a figurative number that means a unlimited amount of time potentially. They're saying it's a part signified by a whole. This is the first amillennial writing. Okay, and this is around probably the 260s, middle of the 3rd century, about 75 years before the Council of Nicaea. Okay. So this is what happens now, okay? Why, if you have so many witnesses to the Antichrist and all this stuff, and again, he's still talking about, let's see, he shall not know the lust of women, although he was most impure, he shall know no God of his fathers. He's still weaving in Daniel with Revelation. He's still saying Daniel and Revelation are about the same thing. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the women sit. That is the city of Rome. Okay, that's where he thinks it's Rome, the mystery Babylon being Rome. So you see, I remember indeed that it's called Babylon in the Apocalypse, on account of confusion, as Isaiah, Ezekiel call it Sodom. In fine, when you compare the descendants of Sodom, Isaiah says against Babylon, and that the Apocalypse says you'll find that they are all one. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. That is the city of Rome. Okay, and so he's going to be the first one to put it forward that the 7-hilled city is Rome, and that's talking about the emperors, and the other one is not yet come. One remains, under which the Apocalypse was written, Domitian. Still nobody, and I mean nobody, until the 1800s. No, I take that back. It might be the early 1900s. I found the book. It's the guy who says, I know this disagrees with all the church fathers, but I think it's right anyway. And that's the guy who says, I think John wrote it during the reign of Nero. It literally was like either the late 1800s or early 1900s when that happened, okay? And this guy, I'm citing this in my Rightly Dividing book that I'm writing. This guy writes this book, and he admits that none of the early church fathers say this, but I think they're all wrong. And he doesn't give a reason why, okay? It's awful. He's just trying to promote preterism, and he's an idiot, okay? Everybody knew John wrote during Domitian. I mean, this is 200 years later. This is the first amillennialist is saying this, okay? That's the first statement that you can count as amillennial, okay? And he's saying the millennium is not literal. But what he's saying is it's a part, not the full, okay? So when you get to why does it end up going down as amillennial in Roman Catholic history? And the answer is Eusebius. Eusebius is basically the keeper of Origen's library, okay? Him and Pamphilus, which is his teacher, inherit Origen's entire staff of books. They worship Origen. They basically run a school based on Origen, okay? And what happens is you have Lactantius, who is an older man than Origen or than Eusebius by about 20-30 years, and Lactantius teaches. I gotta figure out which son this is. So Lactantius teaches Constantine's son Crispus, and then when Crispus is in like his mid-20s, he ends up, he literally dies the year after the Council of Nicaea. Now, I am not going to accuse Eusebius of anything, but Eusebius is the guy who supposedly orchestrates getting the Trinitarian homoousion used, and he works this out against Arius. He has Constantine's ear. He writes a book praising, I have his church history right here. He writes basically 20% of the book praising Origen and the other 20% praising Constantine, and the rest is dedicated to 300 years of church history. Okay? He is not a great scholar. He is a propagandist. He has Constantine's ear, and listen to this. The guy who would have been emperor, this is Constantine's firstborn. He's already emperor of like part of the Roman Empire, and he would have been Constantine's heir, okay? All of a sudden, this rumor comes out that this guy slept with his Constantine's wife. Basically, it would be his stepmom. Okay, and this guy gets axed. Constantine kills him. He kills his stepwife. He kills another guy, supposedly the Christian Constantine, right? And you have Eusebius having his ear. Eusebius manipulates the whole homoousion thing, and then Eusebius also writes in his church history how the real Christians who know what they're talking about believe in amillennialism. They don't believe it's literal, but idiots like Papias, because they were just not learned like we are, they believe it's a literal 1,000 years. And he starts attacking what they call Chiliasm, which is premillennialism. Okay, it's from there that the Roman Empire basically believes in. They believe in a literal millennium until 1000 AD. There are people who are freaking out at 1000 AD, and then when it doesn't happen, that's when they start saying the millennium is all figurative. And it's the reformers who carry away with a figurative millennium. You do not have this, and you don't have this in the pre-Nicene area. I showed you, like, the earliest amillennial statements are not statements against the millennium, they're statements against the resurrection of the dead. Okay? And then you have this one who's coming from a guy who doesn't believe in the resurrection of the dead, who's saying the millennium is standing for a part of it, but that's because you have everybody before him thinking they're around the year 55 to 5800. Okay? That's how old they think it is. So, again, double check my work. Ask me if you need me to cite anything. That was Victorinus. This is ANF 07. And he's just going to write a complete commentary on the apocalypse, and you can tell every one of these guys believed that Daniel was fulfilled in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation was written in Domitian. That's 20 to 30 years after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. The people who are trying to work Daniel to be over in 70 AD are not treating the book of Revelation at all. That's Tertullian and Clement. Okay? So this is my challenge to you, Chris, and this other guy. If you guys want to have a discussion about this, you want to question me on any stuff, fine. Let me question you, fine. I don't want to have a debate. I don't think that's productive, and I don't think it's really all that godly. I feel like debates are more like rhetorical contests, and I feel like brothers coming together should refine each other by challenging their propositions in a way that says, why do you believe that? Where do we agree? Where do we get off course and disagree? Which one of us is right or wrong? And present your best evidence, and then just walk away and chew on that evidence and decide, okay, do we come to agreement, or are we going to agree to disagree? But here's what I'm saying, Chris. I'm saying one brother to another, you don't have anything to stand on, I don't believe, of Daniel's 70th week being fulfilled in Christ. I've asked you for that information, and if you can give me what you have, but I'm showing you that the whole early church disagreed with you. Like, nobody thought it was fulfilled in Christ's lifetime except for people who said it was fulfilled in 70 AD, and they have some whacked out ways of getting there. Okay? Nobody thought that 70 weeks were over in Christ's lifetime. Nobody. 0 people. They're all talking about Daniel's 70 weeks, and they're all lacing it into the book of Revelation, and they're all making it about the Antichrist. Some people are making it about 70 AD, but nobody's making it about Christ's lifetime. Nobody on planet Mars is talking about it being Stephen. That didn't come until you had preterists coming about. Okay, those arguments. This is 18th, 19th century stuff. So it's not like, oh, for thousands of years people are just sitting here with Daniel and Revelation and not reading and going, I don't know what that means. They definitely were. And that stuff was suppressed in the West because the Reformers were the worst propagandists of all. I mean, the Catholics were dogmatic about what they believed, but this idea of like Catholics hid all the stuff, Catholics burned all the stuff, it's just not true. There's so much crap people find in the Catholic libraries and stuff like that that disagree with what the Catholics say, and Catholics just have their dogmatic rules that they say trumpet, but they don't destroy writings. They have tons of stuff, okay? You have the Muslims keeping stuff, you have the Catholics keeping stuff, you have the Orthodox keeping stuff. It's not till you get to the Reformers where the Reformers are hardcore propagandists, and then they're blaming the Catholics for everything. They just hate the Catholics, okay? So, like, the way I see this is I see a bunch of people getting off in little bits and pieces, and that eventually crystallizes in Reformation amillennialism. The Catholics don't know what they believe about eschatology because they have all these guys on which they've built their authority who don't agree with each other. They're going to cite Clement, they're going to cite Tertullian, they're going to cite Hippolytus, they're going to cite Novatus when it's convenient to them. They're going to call that person a heretic when it's not convenient to them. The same people. And then the ultimate decision goes to Pope so-and-so. That's how they do it. So they don't have to throw anything out. They just need to ex cathedra say, that's bound, that's loosed. That's how they do it. Okay? So it's the Protestants who need to suppress information. And I find them suppressing information right in this stuff. Okay? Most of it they're doing with commentary because they do... The Reformers do... they are strong academics. They do have a strong academic bent about getting the true information out there, but when it comes to interpretation, they're constantly whitewashing. When it comes to writing about it, they're constantly whitewashing. So I want to show you this because the reason you don't have this coming out until Darby, and I don't know which of this Darby's citing or if he's just getting his stuff from the Bible. I really haven't studied the origins of Darbyism yet. I will when I get to that part of my book, but I'm like right before Nicaea right now. I'm dealing with Paul of Samosata, and I'm dealing with the political controversies that are leading up to the emperor getting drawn into the Council of Nicaea. So when I get there, I'll dig through it very thoroughly. But I would hope that you can bring this to Scott Clement and show you, like, look, we don't need to just grab the text and speculate and say, I think it meant this or I think it meant that, okay? We can do that, but when we go to the text, if there's going to be disagreement with two brothers, the first thing we do is we go to older Christians and say, hey, these guys didn't have denominational rhetorical champions and, backbiting fights back and forth trying to ad hominem attack everybody and trying to prove why their denomination's better. I mean, you're dealing with a denomination that started out with somebody trying to put people under the law of Moses based on a prophecy that didn't come true, and then they basically recast their prophecy after the fact, and that's your baseline. And then the original theology is based on a form of amillennialism that was really bad and came out of the Reformation. Go back to the early church when they just had the scriptures, and yes, they had their errors, but there's a lot less of them because you have 1 or 2 generations of people that they're building theology on, not 50. So what I would challenge you guys to do is go back and look at this, review my notes, review my math, definitely push back, definitely challenge me on this, but let's talk about it because people who are interested in studying Daniel carefully and studying the book of Revelation carefully, we are a minority in the church. And we should not be fighting over things that we've already seen fought over 2,000 years ago, and these guys sorted it out, and where almost everybody landed was Daniel is definitely, Revelation is definitely talking about Daniel, and it's definitely talking about the end times, okay? We have dual fulfillment prophecies right in Isaiah 8, where you have a child born and then it's about Jesus as well. Okay, we have aspects of 2 Samuel where the prophecies about Solomon and about Jesus as well. Okay, so there's definitely precedence for a dual fulfillment prophecy, and it doesn't have to dual fulfill the whole prophecy. It just has to dual fulfill the parts that are dual fulfilled. That's it. So the idea of them flowing, where it's like this leads to this, and then this leads to this, and then they kind of overlap in terms of the dual fulfillment, that's normal for prophecy, and we can prove that with prophecies that have been fulfilled. And I would just say to you guys, like, even if we disagree, or like let's say we come to a general consensus, like maybe part of this was about Christ's first coming. Okay, I'm not totally discounting that, but let's not discount that it's about a second coming. Okay, let's not discount that there is a type, at least a second version of Daniel's 70th week in the book of Revelation that's in the future, and it's about the Antichrist. I'm asking you guys to get on board with that because here's why. I think we're heading towards that now, and I think there's an extreme shortage of people who can ring the bell and say, you guys, this is being fulfilled. And listen to what these guys are saying. These guys are saying when the whole world is ruled by emperors, and there are no democracies anywhere, okay? And this guy is saying in the last days it's going to turn into a bunch of democracies. That's how they interpreted it. They knew what a democracy was because they had them in Greece. Okay, but Rome had conquered all that. Alexander the Great conquered it first, and then Rome conquered that, okay? These guys hadn't seen democracies at this time in 500 years. And yet they said the whole world is going to be divided up into democracies in the last days. That is prophetic. Like, how did these guys get this stuff? We need to key in on what these guys said and why they said it, because they knew our day. And, again, when we're talking about that 6,000 years, redundant, literal 6,000 years, I have done the math as best as I possibly can. We're in the millennium right now. But I don't think the millennium has to be a full 1,000 years, and here's why. Because Adam's day was 930 years, I think? And I think the Lord's day could be, that's why the absolute latest date I would put the second coming is 2070. I think it's going to be sooner than that. But I mean, the world is saying we're going to have AI running and controlling everything, and you're all going to be plugged into it, and we're going to have immortality and all that stuff by the early 2030s. By 2035, 2037, it's doomsday, basically, based on just what they're doing with AI. So let's put our heads together and let's use the best of the best scholarship to squash the stuff that is not glorifying God like the more we're on the same page and the more we're showing people, hey, you guys, like, we're in the end days, here's the prophecies, here's how they're fulfilled. Let's squash out the 2,300 years thing, because I think we're both in agreement on that. The 2,300 years thing is garbage. It is garbage. It came from the Seventh-day Adventists. It came from Ellen G. White. It came from people trying to reconfigure it was the original. It wasn't, what was his name, Armstrong, or what was the guy who came up with the original prophecy for the 2,300 years? It was a bad prophecy. It was a prediction. It was an interpretation of a prophecy that came and went and proved it was wrong. Let's just be done with it and go back to the one day, one night thing and get rid of that. There's nothing about 1844. And let's go to, well, what is the fulfillment of this? 2,300 days and nights. Well, that was what happened in Antiochus' day. It might also be what happens from the beginning of the sacrifices until Jesus touched down and splits the mountain and stops the sacrifices. It might be that as well, because dual fulfillments are not out. So, anyways, I hope this is useful information. Again, all this stuff is online for free. If you go to ANF 007 or you just look up Anti-Nicene Fathers on Wikipedia, it will take to links. There's Christian Classics Ethereal Library where you can look at all this stuff for free. Double check my work. Again, if you guys don't go to this stuff, I'm going to start calling you guys out as just being like anti-intellectual, like bullcrap artists, because this is stuff that you guys are claiming the dispensationalists came up with. I definitely showed you that they did not. And I don't want to hear that from anyone. I don't want to hear anyone, an amillennialist, a preterist, dispensation, or anyone. I don't want to hear an Adventist, anyone say that the dispensationalists came up with futurism. That is a lie, and I have proven that is categorically a lie, okay? Don't say it. It's not true. I just gave you like 10 witnesses that it's not true, okay? 10 witnesses from before Nicaea that it's not true. Okay, so please stop saying that. Please correct your friends who are saying that. It's just crap propaganda. It is not theology. It is not scholarship. It is crap propaganda, okay? So anyways, like I said, Chris, in love, you seem like a solid dude. You seem sincere. So hopefully, this will help you in your journey. You said some stuff on the video that's helped me think through some things. So, I'm doing this in love, and hopefully you can you take that to the people that you have more influence over, and challenge their propositions, and all of you will come up and join the table, and we have better eschatology. We just have better understanding and interpretation of prophecy altogether. So that's my goal. And then again, my Revelation book is going to lay out most of this. So anyone that you have influence over, if you can point them to that book or to my channel, I'm just trying to get the word out there. I think we could be within 10 years of Jesus Christ being back. I really do. And so that's why I am trying to pump this out there. I think I crossed 301 maybe followers, after I've been doing this since 2018. So 2019, I'm sorry. So anyways, I hope you guys are blessed by this. Hope you have a great rest of your Sunday. Batman out. Peace.
Peace, I'm out. I'm Batman.